Chapter 2069. All four heavenly gods have been defeated. Impossible. That's absolutely impossible. How could Lan Xiaoni and Demon Lord Ling Gu defeat all four of us? The 60 million heavenly human tribe united army had also heard Lan Xiaoni's words, but they were unable to believe this was the truth. Never would they have thought that this would happen. However, the massive water dragon continued to pounce toward another great general, and it looked like it was going to devour the next great general. Demon Lord Ling Gu also sprang into action, slaughtering his way through the heavenly human tribe united army. Without the heavenly gods holding him back, he was invincible. Lan Xiaoni and Demon Lord Ling Gu were both displaying their invincible combat prowess on the battlefield. But where were the heavenly gods? This was the cruel reality. No matter how incredulous the heavenly human tribe united army was, the battle before their eyes told them the truth. The heavenly gods had indeed been slain. The heavenly human tribe united army had clearly held the upper hand, but it was slowly beginning to show signs of collapse. This was the massive impact that top-rate combat prowess had on the battlefield. There was no one on the battlefield who could keep Lan Xiaoni and Demon Lord Ling Gu in check. Large batches of casualties began to appear, and even the great generals were beginning to feel threatened. If this battle continued, there was no way they could win. On top of that, the deaths of the four heavenly gods had also impacted the morale of the heavenly human tribe united army, and some of the heavenly human tribe united army began to contemplate retreating. Finally, another heavenly human tribe great general was devoured by the water dragon, and another heavenly human tribe great general was blasted to death by Demon Lord Ling Gu. The morale of the heavenly human tribe united army was finally beginning to crumble. "Heed my command, retreat!" A heavenly human tribe great general roared as he raised his sword. The heavenly human tribe united army began to retreat like a receding tide. "Don't let them go. Charge!" The West Sea Alliance army chased after the heavenly human tribe united army, reaping lives in a frenzy. This was the perfect moment to reap the spoils of war. Above the West Sea, an army of over 20 million was chasing after an army of over 60 million. This was an extremely peculiar scene on the West Sea. Lan Xingyang controlled Amoyi to chase after the heavenly human tribe united army, and every time he swung his golden trident through the air, it would sweep up massive waves and devastating gale-force winds, inflicting tens of thousands of casualties on the heavenly human tribe united army. He looked at the back of his daughter, who was still fighting at the forefront. Her battle prowess was unparalleled, and she was invincible. She was like the sun in the West Sea that would never fall. For some reason, Lan Xingyang felt a wave of sorrow and heartache. He knew exactly what Lan Xiaoni had endured to become so powerful. His daughter's growth in just 100 years could only be described as terrifying. She had transformed from a frail girl who loved to cry into the leader of the West Sea. How big of a transformation was that? It wasn't just hard work, but also the fear of the unknown, the pressure from terrifying enemies, the pressure of distrust from allies, as well as the countless hardships and life-and-death battles. How could a crybaby walk like this all the way? What was it that supported her to not collapse? Lan Xingyang felt that all of this was related to that man. He was the man who had bullied Lan Xiaoni, deceived all of the powerful beings of the West Sea, then left in a willful and irresponsible manner, and even faked his death for 100 years. If it weren't for the divine Phoenix Maiden, Lan Xingyang would most likely pay that man a visit in person and ask him when he would be able to turn his daughter into his big brother's woman. Lan Xingyang couldn't help but glance toward the east. He didn't know what that man was doing. The sun slowly set. A ball of golden light with a hint of fiery red light hung in the sky. Night had already fallen. On the battlefield at the very center of the Tai Chu continent, there was a ball of darkness that was extremely eye-catching, as if it were the leader of the night. There was a youth with a greenish-yellow divine halo above his head, and his body was a semi-transparent amber. There was pure darkness tearing at his chest, as if it were a wound that was going to engulf him sooner or later. This wounded youth was the heavenly earth god, who struck fear into the hearts of the entire continent. He was the paramount representative of the heavenly Tao, the most powerful being of the heavenly human tribe, and one of the most powerful enemies of the entire human race. He's so fast! The heavenly earth god stared at the man who had just unleashed his sword strike with astonishment. He had thought that the man before him wouldn't be a match for him, as he hadn't completely released his power of darkness. After all, both of them were paramount beings, and he was a complete paramount heavenly god. However, at this moment, this thought seemed so laughable. He had overlooked a very important point. The heavenly Tao's subconsciousness was able to suppress him, and it was able to suppress Sinlin completely differently. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Brilliant light erupted from the white liquid before transforming into countless golden blades that pierced toward Lin's chest. And Lin flicked his wrist, and his evil-slaying sword transformed into a series of black afterimages that instantly sliced through all of the oncoming golden blades into nothingness. He wasn't just slicing through them or slicing them into molecules. Instead, he was completely erased along with the entire liquid before him. The heavenly earth god hurtled back in retreat, and his expression darkened even further upon seeing this. So, even the solitary substance can't do anything to you. Who would have thought that you would be able to unleash the power of darkness to such an extent? And Lin didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at the heavenly earth god in silence. He seemed to have become a completely different person. His expression was extremely cold, and he didn't care about anything. He didn't even have any interest in flexing anymore. The only thought in his mind was to destroy the heavenly earth god. And Lin made his way toward the heavenly earth god, and the earth and sky behind him had become pure darkness. The darkness struck fear into the hearts of all the heavenly gods. Compared to the heavenly earth god, and Lin was like a true heavenly god. He was cold and aloof, and his divine might surged into the heavens. He was mysterious and unfathomable, carrying out the paramount will of the heavens. Is this really in Lin? The heavenly yin-yang god's voice was trembling slightly. He was the master of yin and yang, and darkness was theoretically related to yin as well. However, he had never seen such darkness before. This was a darkness that even he, who was most familiar with yin and yang, couldn't understand. It was quite clear that the darkness before his eyes had already transcended beyond the realm of his knowledge. It was too pure. It represented both nothingness and destruction, as well as tranquility and eternity. Even though he was also a heavenly god, he was struck by a sense of inexplicable horror. Heavenly sea god, and Lin is already in such a sorry state. Are you still not going to do anything? The heavenly yin-yang god asked with an extremely nervous expression. The heavenly sea god was still in a daze, and he came to his senses upon hearing this. Do anything? The heavenly earth god hasn't told me to do anything yet. It would be a bad idea to disrupt his battle. The heavenly sea god spoke with a serious expression. Even if he tells me to do anything, I won't do anything. Things seemed to have gone beyond his expectations again. However, that was all right. This was a good thing for him, wasn't it? Right at this moment. And Lin took a step forward and charged toward the heavenly earth god again. Chapter 2070. And Lin's speed was extremely fast, and nothing between heaven and earth could impede his footsteps. Everything that stood in his way was engulfed by his darkness. The evil-slaying sword slashed down upon the heavenly earth god. Do you really think I can't do anything to you just because I can't suppress you? The heavenly earth god's eyes narrowed, and he evaded in Lin's sword strike with an extremely intricate movement technique before clenching his fist and launching an almighty fist toward the white-robed man before him. Bam! The power of the heavenly god surged. The absolute power of the boundless earth crashed down viciously upon Lin, and the power of the fist encompassed heaven and earth, leaving Lin nowhere to run. That's right, there was no way to evade this punch. A grave expression appeared on Enlin's face, and he quickly drew his sword back to defend himself. At this moment, the fist had already struck his sword. Heaven and earth fell completely silent in that instant. Immediately afterward, an earth-shattering explosion erupted. Boom! The earth was being torn apart, and the heavens were collapsing. Boundless bluish-yellow energy exploded forth, crashing into the expanse of absolute darkness in a frenzy. From afar, it looked as if the black and the bluish-yellow were clashing. The heavenly earth god had injected all of his power into this fist. The entire Tai Chu continent resonated with him, and the boundless power of the earth converged toward his fist, which crashed down upon the white-robed man with the power of the entire Tai Chu continent. The darkness behind Enlin surged violently, and it was even showing signs of receding. The earth represented matter, while the darkness represented nothingness. These were two completely different elements. This was the first clash between matter and nothingness. The sky and earth had lost all color, and everything in this world had been replaced by the boundless power of the earth and the pure power of darkness. The heavenly yin-yang god and the heavenly sea god were both knocked back by the shock waves from the clash. Even the oceanic cage around them had been torn apart. This clash was far too exaggerated. Not only was it massive, but it was also lasting for a very long time. On the battlefield at Yutong City, which was extremely far away, not only were all of the powerful beings watching, but even the normal soldiers were also able to see the clash in the west. At the end of the horizon that was dyed red by the setting sun, a greenish-yellow color and darkness were madly clashing and strangling each other. A terrifying power completely covered this part of the world. Heavens, what level of battle is this? I can sense the boundless true intent of the heavenly earth god from it. There's no mistaking it. That bluish-yellow energy is definitely the power of the heavenly earth god. It can't be. Could it be that the earth and the darkness are fighting? What's going on? All the experts were dumbfounded. They had no idea what was happening in the distance. Weren't the mysterious heavenly darkness god and the domineering heavenly earth god supposed to be enemies of the human race? How did they end up fighting each other? And what role did Enlin play in all of this? All the living beings on the battlefield were at a loss. However, no matter what, a battle between two utmost beings would most likely be beneficial to them. On the massive battlefield, only Su Xiaolan, the battling Buddha, Yun Menjing Michael, and the others knew what that darkness represented. Some of them were worried, some of them were excited, and some of them wanted nothing more than to abandon the battle before them and rush over to spectate. This was a battle between two paramount heavenly gods who wouldn't want to spectate. The sun gradually sank below the horizon, and the colors of dusk became even dimmer. The bluish-yellow energy and the power of darkness were still clashing and clashing. The power of the earth was drawn from the entire Tai Chu continent, and it could be said that there was no end to it. Meanwhile, the power of darkness was profound and eternal. No matter how violently the power of the earth attacked, it showed no signs of weakening, and no one knew when it would stop. The heavenly earth god's fist crashed down upon Enlin with unstoppable force. Enlin wielded his evil-slaying sword in front of him, and also tried his best to ram his sword down upon the heavenly earth god's body. Black sword intent erupted forth, slicing through the heavenly earth god's body relentlessly. The impasse between the two of them lasted longer than expected. The heavenly yin-yang god was very astonished. Never would he have thought that Enlin would be able to hold his own against the heavenly earth god for so long. Did he already possess paramount heavenly god power? However, he soon began to think again. The heavenly yin-yang god shot a series of meaningful glances at the heavenly sea god, but the heavenly sea god acted as if he didn't see them at all. The heavenly yin-yang god was very anxious. Heavenly sea god, the two of them are currently in a stalemate. If you enter the fray, you'll be able to break the stalemate and kill Enlin with ease. Enlin's latent potential and power are far too terrifying. We can't let him live. We have to kill him now. If we allow him to continue to live, he'll be a huge threat in the future. The heavenly yin-yang god tried to persuade the heavenly sea god. The heavenly sea god remained unmoved. Disturbing the heavenly earth god at a time like this would be an insult to him. I won't step in unless he asks for my help in person, the heavenly sea god said. The heavenly yin-yang god's face convulsed as he looked at the heavenly earth god, who was battling Enlil. The heavenly earth god was completely focused on defending against Enlil, and he couldn't even say a single word. How was he supposed to ask for help from the heavenly earth god? He wasn't going to say that as he had suddenly thought of a good idea. If the heavenly sea god didn't want to step in, he could do it himself. The heavenly earth god couldn't bring himself to ask for help, so he, the heavenly yin-yang god, could take the initiative. The heavenly earth god would reprimand him on the surface, but perhaps his impression of him would improve a lot. Besides, at a time like this, getting rid of enemies that harm the heavens was the right thing to do. That was what the heavenly gods were supposed to do, and they had to do it at all costs. Wasn't it a joke to say that it was for the sake of pride in battle? After coming to this conclusion, the heavenly yin-yang god was no longer burdened. His body suddenly flashed, and he tore through space before charging toward Enlil at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, he wielded his black and white dual blades and roared, "Heavenly earth god, I'll lend you a hand. I, the heavenly yin-yang god, will break the stalemate between the two sides. I, the heavenly yin-yang god, will be the one to end this battle. I will crush the arrogant Enlil into the dust and trample him beneath my feet." This was the most critical moment, as well as the most critical turning point for the heavenly Tao. I'll be the one to decide everything. A sense of heroism welled up in the heavenly yin-yang god's heart. He wielded his yin and yang dual blades, and a massive yin-yang twin fish formation appeared behind him. The formation rotated endlessly, as if it had encompassed all of the mysterious powers of this world. All of this power then converged onto the black and white dual blades, thereby maximizing the power of the dual blades. Heavenly God Technique, yin-yang slash of heaven and earth. The heavenly yin-yang god didn't underestimate Enlil, and he immediately unleashed his killing technique. The black and white dual blades slashed down upon the darkness before him with boundless might. The heavenly yin-yang god's original intention was to break the stalemate between the two sides. It would be best if he could sever Enlil's head as well. However, to his surprise, his black blade had only just been unleashed when his yin-yang slash of heaven and earth fused into the darkness before him in an extremely peculiar manner. It was as if a drop of water had fallen into a deep pond, and it didn't even make a single ripple. How? How is this possible? The heavenly yin-yang god's eyes widened. Before he had a chance to react, his white blade was sucked away by the bluish-yellow energy behind him. It was as if the white blade was a delicacy to the bluish-yellow energy and could replenish its energy. The heavenly yin-yang god had charged toward Enlil with his yin-yang dual blades in his hands, but one of his weapons had been swallowed by an enemy, while the other had been stolen by an ally. He stood awkwardly between the battle between Enlil and the heavenly earth god. Chapter 2071. The heavenly yin god's killing technique had been nullified before he even had a chance to unleash it. This made him feel extremely embarrassed and humiliated. Could it be that he had come here to deliver his twin blades to these two? He was clearly trying to become a bad asterisk SS who could change the course of this battle. So how did he end up as a stupid C asterisk NT? Was there something wrong with him? The heavenly earth god and Enlil's expressions remained calm, and neither of them changed their course of action. Instead, they continued to clash with one another. The heavenly yin god felt like he had been completely ignored and humiliated, and he glowered at the white-robed man before him with rage and killing intent. "I'm already here, Enlil, and you're not even blinking? Don't you know that you're about to be killed by me?" The heavenly yin god was just about to continue his attack. Right at this moment, he felt as if something was wrong with his body, as if it was no longer under his control. His heart jolted with shock, and he focused his attention on his own body, only to discover that his body was being tightly gripped by two terrifying powers. His body was composed of black and white halves. At this moment, the black half was being drawn toward the darkness before him, as if it were going to fuse into the darkness at any moment. Meanwhile, the white half was being pulled toward him by the power of the earth behind him, as if there was something in his body that the power of the earth required to decide the outcome of this battle. The heavenly God was unable to move, but his body was being torn in half, and he held with pain. In a top-tier battle, any energy source could decide the outcome of the battle. Both the power of darkness and the power of the earth were fighting over the heavenly God. To them, the heavenly God was nothing more than a takeaway. The heavenly God's blood-curdling cries reverberated throughout heaven and earth. The heavenly God was filled with remorse, and tears were about to flow from his eyes. Previously, he was still dissatisfied with the neglect of the two powerhouses. Now that the two powerhouses paid attention to him, they treated him like food. This made him experience a wave of yin and yang imbalance, a feeling that was worse than death rip. In the end, the heavenly God's body was still torn in half. The black half of his body fused into the darkness behind Enlil. The white half of his body was dragged into the heavenly earth god's power of the earth. The power of both sides seemed to have increased by a level. Then they continued to collide. The heavenly sea god looked on coldly from high in the sky. The heavenly sea god really couldn't be bothered to say anything about heavenly yin-yang god seeking death. A weakling wanted to break the balance of the battle between the strong? You want to dominate the battlefield? What a joke! Everything that was happening in front of him was reality. Weaklings didn't even have the qualifications to stand in front of them. Even if they went over, they would just be sending themselves to their deaths. It was literally food delivery. Above the void, black and white lights converged. Very soon, the heavenly yin-yang god's figure reappeared. He half knelt in the void and panted heavily. There was an unconcealable fear on his face. Oh, he actually didn't die? I have to admit that you're quite capable as a yin-yang god. A hint of surprise appeared on the heavenly sea god's face upon seeing the heavenly yin-yang god's reappearance. The heavenly yin-yang god was still panting heavily and didn't want to speak to the heavenly sea god. At that moment, he also thought he was going to die. If he hadn't reacted fast enough and successfully triggered the yin and yang of heaven and earth to create a chance of survival for him at the moment of being torn apart, he would have been eaten alive by those two fellows. Gotcha! Countless cracks began to appear on the heavenly yin-yang god's divine halo. The heavenly yin-yang god's heart throbbed with pain and remorse upon seeing this. He shouldn't have interfered with their battle. Why did he have to flex and try to steal the limelight? Serves him right. The darkness before me is even more like darkness than the yin-type power that I wield. He possesses the most essential power of darkness, and now he can use this power to oppose the heavenly earth god's power of earth. The heavenly yin-yang god was still astonished by Enlin's identity. Is he the true darkness? The heavenly sea god smiled and didn't say anything. At this moment, if the heavenly yin-yang god still hadn't figured out Enlin's true identity, then he would have to be as intelligent as the heavenly weather god. At this moment, Enlil and the heavenly earth god were still clashing with one another. The only thing that remained unchanged was that the heavenly yin-yang god had no intention of intervening. He was as quiet as an obedient little chick. In the eastern region of the Tai-Chu continent, Wind Plain State, hundreds of thousands of kilometers of land in the northern region had been blanketed in snow and wind. Over 2 billion humans had been buried under the boundless snow and wind. The snow and wind were still trying to descend south with the power of extreme frost, but they were stopped at the center of the Wind Plain State by a massive spell formation. This was none other than the god of creation, stage, myriad spirit, great ultimate formation. It kept the extreme frost natural disaster, which was powerful enough to destroy the entire kingdom of the 9 states, at bay. The 10,000 Spirits Immortal Sect was the spell formation core of the Myriad Spirit Great Ultimate Formation, and an earth-shattering battle was taking place there. The outcome of this battle would determine the fate of the human race in the Kingdom of the Nine States. Deafening explosions rang out over and over again on the ground. The ring of fire around the 10,000 Spirits Immortal Sect had already been completely torn apart by the snow ghost beasts, and over 50 million snow ghost beasts surged into the 10,000 Spirits Immortal Sect territory in a frenzy. There were already over 30 million snow ghost beast carcasses on the ground, but there were simply too many of them. Even the 4-9 Immortal Sect's most powerful cultivators were struck by despair. One mountain after another collapsed, and countless Spirit Immortal Sect disciples were buried under the rubble. There were even some elite members of the 4-9 Immortal Sect who had been sacrificed, and there were even a few return to Void Stage mighty figures who had fallen. The setting sun descended upon the earth, and a few stars appeared in the night sky. The Starfire battleship soared through the air, and its cannon fire never ceased. Boom, boom, boom. A series of dazzling explosions erupted on the ground. Up to this point, close to 20 million snow ghost beasts had fallen to the Starfire battleship's cannon fire. After being modified by Bai Ling's advanced technology, the Starfire battleship was responsible for cleaning up enemies, and it was far more powerful than a Dao integration stage super mighty figure. However, even such an invincible battleship was becoming more and more vulnerable. Big Sister Bai, our battleship is out of energy, and we're about to run out of backup energy as well. Lu Qianhuan's voice sounded with anxiety and exasperation. Bai Ling stood at the forefront of the battleship and looked at the vast expanse of snow ghost beasts before her. She knew that if the cannon fire stopped, the army of snow ghost beasts would definitely engulf them all. She had to maintain their suppressive fire. Bai Ling was caught between a rock and a hard place. At this moment, a handsome man in a flowing white robe landed beside Bai Ling. He looked at the cannons that were becoming more and more feeble, and a smile appeared on his face. Pavilion Lord Bai Ling, please use my power. Bai Ling clenched her fists tightly as she looked at the man before her. Xianyuan Cheng, we haven't reached that point yet. Let me see if there are any other ways. Xianyuan Cheng looked at the collapsed mountains and the lifeless, white-robed cultivators lying on the ground before shaking his head. No, it'll be too late if we don't make a decision now. Bai Ling gritted her teeth. You have to realize that if we completely activate your power and exhaust your latent potential, your immortal path could very well be ruined. Xianyuan Cheng's expression was firm. So many brothers and sisters have already sacrificed themselves before me. So why can't I, Xianyuan Cheng, sacrifice myself? Not to mention ruining my immortal cultivation. Even if you want my life, so what? Bai Ling. Several seconds of silence ensued. Several long seconds passed. Bai Ling finally took a deep breath, and a hint of determination appeared on her face. All right, let's begin. 4-9 Truyong Plan, activate. Chapter 2072. Within the core cockpit of the Starfire battleship, the spatial gate connected to the crystal opened, and Lu Qianhuan, who was dressed in a sorceress outfit, emerged from within. She looked at the man before her with a complex expression. Who would have thought that I, the Starfire battleship maiden, would have to yield my position one day? A warm smile appeared on Xianyuan Cheng's face. Don't worry, I'm only going to use it once. I probably won't get another chance in the future. Lu Qianhuan bit down on her lower lip. What are you talking about? I'm a very generous person, and I'll let you do it if you want to in the future. So take care of yourself and don't force yourself. Just unleash a few cannons, and I'll take care of everything outside. Xianyuan Cheng made his way into the cabin. If I really can't come back, then Shu Honglan. All right, I'll make sure Shu Honglan finds happiness. Lu Qianhuan nodded. Xianyuan Cheng. So, if you don't want Shu Honglan to be with me, then you'd better live a good life. Lu Qianhuan spoke with a serious expression. A warm feeling welled up in Shen Yuancheng's heart, and he nodded lightly. The cabin door began to close, and the spiritual connection began. On the Starfire battleship, an exceptional sword immortal descended from the sky. A black-furred, snow, ghost beast immediately pounced toward the sword immortal upon seeing this. The black-furred, snow, ghost beast's combat prowess was comparable to a return to void stage mighty figure, and it was responsible for hunting down return to void stage mighty figures. After all, return to void stage mighty figures could unleash large-scale spell techniques that were extremely lethal. The black-furred, snow ghost beast's claws burned with dark green flames. These flames were imbued with an unimaginably lethal poison, and once the claws pierced into its opponent's body, they would be paralyzed by the poisonous flames before being incinerated into ashes. It had used this technique to kill a return to void stage mighty figure from the 4-9 Immortal sect with the help of another black-furred, snow ghost beast. It would be a wonderful thing to see this extremely beautiful woman wail in agony as she perished from the poisonous flames. With this in mind, a sinister smile appeared on the black-furred, snow ghost beast's face. The black-furred, snow ghost beast was extremely fast. However, when it was 10 miles away from the woman, it suddenly felt that its movements had slowed down. Furthermore, it was getting slower and slower. What was going on? The black-furred, snow, ghost beast looked at the woman approaching it. The woman held the great ice sword in her hand, and she didn't slow down in the slightest. At this moment, it inexplicably surged with infinite fear. The poisonous flames that it had always been proud of were also frozen into unflammable ice cubes in this strange domain. No! Whoosh! The blade flashed. The black-furred, snow ghost beast's body was sliced in half, and its life force was severed. It couldn't even launch an attack before it was instantly killed. This female sword immortal was none other than Lu Qianhuan. She was only at the return to void intermediate stage, but she possessed the power to kill Dao integration initial stage mighty figures. Now that he was at the return to void pinnacle stage, it was a piece of cake for him to deal with a black-furred, snow ghost beast. She didn't stop after killing one of the snow ghostly beasts. She stepped lightly in the air and charged toward the other snow ghostly beast with her sword in hand in an extremely lithe and graceful manner. At this moment, she was a peerless female sword immortal who could kill anything in her way. She was a death god who brought nightmares to her enemy's top-notch combat strength. She was going to take care of the powerful snow, ghostly beasts. She was going to kill all enemies that wanted to threaten the safety of the Starfire battleship. As for the dense army of snow, ghostly beasts, she was going to leave them to Shen Yuancheng. Aside from Lu Qianhuan, Yiling, Cassidy, Tobias, Long Outyin, and the others were also nightmares for the black-furred snow, ghostly beasts. They were not returned to void stage mighty figures at all. None of the powerful snow, ghostly beasts were able to break through their defenses. The return to void stage black-furred snow, ghostly beasts were unable to break through their defenses, so they could only pin their hopes on the 50 million strong army of snow, ghostly beasts. No matter how powerful they were, they would eventually tire out. It was a good idea to exhaust them to death with their invincible numbers. The bombardment from the Starfire battleship became less and less concentrated, and the speed at which the snow, ghostly beasts advanced increased significantly. White shadows surged like waves as they rapidly approached the main peaks. Quick, let's attack in one go. Their battleship is out of ammunition. Roar! Tear them apart. Tear the battleship apart. The snow, ghostly beasts had had enough of the relentless bombardment from the battleship. They couldn't even get close to the main peak of the 10,000 spirits immortal sect. Now that the bombardment had weakened, they were not going to give up on this rare opportunity. The snow, ghostly beasts became even more ferocious and bloodthirsty as they charged forward. Soon, close to 1,000 more 10,000 spirits immortal sect disciples fell in battle. A dozen or so soul formation stage elites from the 4-9 Immortal sect had also perished. All of them were unable to defend against the terrifying numbers of the snow ghostly beasts. However, this did not deter the other soul formation stage cultivators, and they continued to fight on the front lines. Charge! Avenge our brothers! Ha ha ha! I've already killed 1,000 beasts, and that's more than enough. I can die with no regrets now that I can fight alongside all of you. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion erupted. Just as he was about to be engulfed by the beast tide, the man chose to self-detonate. The explosion blasted several hundred snow, ghostly beasts into pieces. Brother Wang Yu, damn it! The 4-9 Immortal sect disciples gritted their teeth and fought with all their might. Their bodies were riddled with wounds of all sizes. But in the face of a despairing army of snow, ghostly beasts, they took the initiative to fight against the beast tide and fight with all their might. They were like pillars of indomitable spirit that stood above the waves. There are countless civilians behind us. Hold on. We have to hold on. I haven't even tasted sect leader and Lin's cooking yet. I have to hold on. I have no regrets in entering the 4-9 Immortal sect. It's my honor to fight alongside all of you. I'll be taking my leave now. No. Boom, boom, boom. They self-detonated again and again, dying in battle until the very last moment. This was an earth-shattering battle, and anyone could be the next victim. Xiao, Zhe, Dongfang Zhuangshi, and the other Dao integration stage super mighty figures were being held back by the 3 heavenly gods. There were many black-furred, snow, ghostly beasts, and there was an endless stream of normal snow, ghostly beasts. They were at a huge disadvantage regardless of whether it was in terms of quantity or quality. In reality, all of the 4-9 Immortal sect disciples knew that this was probably the last battle of their lives. Even so, they still wielded their weapons and fought until the very last moment. If their weapons were bent, they could use their fists. If their vital energy was depleted, they could sacrifice their blood. If worst came to worst, they could ignite their cultivation bases and self-detonate. There are 50 great Daos and 49 heavenly evolutions. Every disciple of the 4-9 Immortal sect would remember these words. No matter what dire straits they were in, no matter how hopeless the situation was, they would always harbor hope in their hearts. They knew that as long as they persevered, a miracle would happen, and there would always be a chance for change. This was the belief of every single member of the 4-9 Immortal sect. Chapter 2073. The members of the 4-9 Immortal sect fought with ferocity. However, all of their efforts were unable to hold back the endless beast tide. Night gradually fell, and the dense pack of white snow ghost beasts appeared even more eye-catching. Their crimson claws also became even more dangerous and brutal. Cassidy was surrounded by 6 black-furred, snow, ghostly beasts. One of the snow, ghostly beasts took advantage of an opening and chopped off one of her arms. Another snow, ghostly beast charged forward and plunged its crimson claws into Cassidy's lower abdomen, trying to slice her in half. It was also at this moment that a crimson light suddenly erupted from the blood that had splattered through the air. A smile as vibrant as a crimson rose appeared on Cassidy's exquisitely beautiful face. Blood sacrifice, divine ghost-slaying blade. Her blood materialized into countless sharp blade projections, and the 2 black-furred snow ghost beasts were sliced in half before they had a chance to react. Cassidy's severed arm turned into blood and fused into her wound before condensing back into a long, white arm. However, the sleeve was gone. She licked her lips and turned to look at the other 4 black-furred, snow, ghostly beasts. Her eyes were filled with danger and madness. There were simply too many enemies. She could only use this method of exchanging injuries for deaths to quickly eliminate the enemies. Aside from her, Tobias and Merlin were also doing the same thing, and it could be said that they were fighting with all their might. The most dazzling members of the blood tribe were Ada, Jinling, Jin Yao, and the triplets. They could unleash Dao integration stage combat prowess through a special spell formation that linked their bloodlines together, thereby making them invincible on the battlefield. The only flaw was that they didn't possess any large-scale spell techniques. They were still struggling to keep up with the onslaught of snow ghost beasts. Boom boom! Another 2 earth-shattering booms erupted. The anguished wails of true dragons followed. 2 black dragons were crushed into the ground by a golden-furred snow soul beast. Boundless power of frost imbued with the paramount power of laws threatened to completely seal their bodies in ice. The 2 black dragons were none other than Xiao, Zhe, and Xiao Tuesday. They were taking advantage of the fact that they had a lot of health points to take the beating. The golden-furred soul beast was extremely strong, but there was nothing it could do against these 2 soul beasts. It couldn't do anything to them. After a while, the golden-furred soul beast finally thought of a way to seal the soul beasts in ice. It planned to completely freeze these 2 troublesome true dragons in this place. Even 2 Dao integration stage super mighty figures had been subdued. Darkness enshrouded the entire 10,000 spirits immortal sect, as well as the hearts of all the 4-9 immortal sect members. Darkness descended, and this battle had come to an end. Everything was coming to an end. All of them were going to be buried in the darkness and buried under a blanket of snow and wind. The snow ghost beasts' attacks became more and more ferocious. The frequency of the Starfire battleship's cannons grew slower and slower, and it could only desperately absorb the power of the stars before continuing to fire. It was clear that its internal energy had been exhausted. Even the 4-9 immortal sect members were feeling an indescribable sense of exhaustion after battling for such a long time, and they were only able to hold on through sheer faith. Cheng Yingxiong wielded his massive sword and pulverized a dozen or so snow ghost beasts before him. However, a few more snow ghost beasts pounced toward him, and he tried to swing his sword to defend himself, only to find that his body had already reached its limit. He was unable to move at all, and his body was punctured by the claws of a few snow ghost beasts, upon which blood splattered through the air. His vision gradually became blurry. So dark! Cheng Yingxiong looked up into the sky to find that night had already enshrouded the entire heaven and earth. There were no stars, no moon, and only heavy snow and dark clouds obscured everything. But all of a sudden, a dazzling ray of light pierced his eyes, causing his blurry consciousness to become clear for a moment. What kind of light is this? Holy F asterisk CK, I'm going blind! Cheng Yingxiong shuddered, and he slashed at the snow ghost beasts beside him before looking up into the sky. His disgruntled expression gradually congealed on his face. His eyes widened, and his mouth gaped open, as if he had seen something extremely astonishing. In the sky above, an extremely dazzling golden light erupted from the Starfire battleship. At the same time, a yin-yang-yin and yang fish slowly revolved beneath the battleship, exuding an extremely powerful true intent of the Tai Chi. This, the Starfire battleship, has become the Tai Chi battleship? Countless disciples were astonished by the scenes unfolding before their eyes. This aura, it's the aura of Pavilion Lord Xianyuan. That's right, that's Prince Charming Xianyuan. Some of the fangirls were already letting loose cries of surprise, and they became even more ferocious. Is he piloting this battleship? Isn't the battleship out of missiles? Also, why is it him? Everyone was quite confused. However, something truly astonishing then occurred. The Starfire battleship's cannons suddenly doubled in frequency, and a series of devastating mushroom clouds rose into the air as the missiles struck the ground. Boom, boom, boom. The heavens trembled and the earth crumbled. Destructive energy crashed into the surrounding snow ghost beasts, and many of them were blasted to death. The battleship has suddenly become more powerful? This is great. We'll be able to turn the tables now. Long live Pavilion Lord Xianyuan. The 4-9 Immortal Sect disciples didn't know how the Starfire battleship was able to fire its cannons, but they knew that this definitely had something to do with Xian Yuancheng, and all of them began to yell with excitement. The firepower of the Starfire battleship became more ferocious once again, and the booming sounds did not stop. Destructive mushroom clouds exploded on the ground, which was filled with snow ghost beasts, forming a destructive front line, and greatly reducing the number of snow ghost beasts that charged into the battlefield. The 4-9 Immortal Sect disciples were finally able to catch their breaths. This was the right rhythm. The Starfire battleship was suppressing the snow ghost beast army, and they were taking care of the remaining snow ghost beasts. The Starfire battleship was the main reason why they were able to hold off the army of snow ghost beasts for so long. This was evident from the dire situation the 4-9 Immortal Sect disciples were in after the Starfire battleship ran out of power. Thankfully, the Starfire battleship had been resurrected and they saw hope again. To them, the Starfire battleship was the sun. The Starfire battleship hovered in the sky, exuding a dazzling golden yang-type power that chased away the frosty aura of the entire battlefield. Bombers had their own heartwarming ways. Not to mention, Big Brother Ching was such a handsome bomber. The 4-9 Immortal Sect's front line was finally stabilized, but the battle was still ongoing. Within the Starfire battleship, Xian Yuancheng used his own Dao to connect with the Starfire battleship, thereby drawing upon the power of the myriad spirit Tai Chi between heaven and earth to attack the snow ghost beasts. This allowed Xian Yuancheng to unleash his full power. Rather than saying that the Starfire battleship was firing its cannons, it was more accurate to say that Xian Yuancheng was the one firing the cannons. However, this type of attack actually had very severe side effects. Aside from overexerting his own energy, it would also severely damage his Dao. In the best-case scenario, he would be unable to progress any further in his cultivation base. In the worst-case scenario, he would lose all of his cultivation base and even his life. Xian Yuancheng was well aware of this. In reality, he was the one who had invented this trump card, so he had already made up his mind as he walked toward the Starfire battleship. If I can win this battle by sacrificing myself, then in Lin's words, it would be a huge win. Within the cockpit, a smile appeared on Xian Yuancheng's handsome face. Now let me put on a spectacular show of explosions. Chapter 2074. At the bottom of the Starfire battleship, the Tai Chi Yin-Yang twin fish formation shone brightly. Every time the pitch-black cannon fired, the great formation would add a great power of heaven and earth to the golden ball of energy, making it even more terrifying. When it landed on the target area, it would explode into destructive energy. The light from the explosions lit up the 10,000 spirits Immortal Sect as if it were daytime. The snow ghost beasts that were like a tidal wave were once again dominated by the fear of carpet bombing. Some of them were burned to death by the extreme heat, while others were killed by the shock waves of the explosions. However, after being suppressed by the Starfire battleship's firepower, not only did they not weaken, but they became even more frenzied. Even though the energy of the explosion in front of them had not completely dissipated, they still charged forward without hesitation. Tear apart all the humans in one go. Roar. Kill, kill, kill. The snow ghost beast's eyes were scarlet, and its face was filled with malevolence and bloodlust. It seemed to have sensed the Starfire battleship's limit, and its attacks became even more ferocious and frightening. The 4-9 Immortal Sect members didn't even have a chance to catch their breath before the pressure bore down on them again. The strategy of these snow ghost beasts was very simple. They were going to overwhelm their enemies with sheer numbers. Inside the Starfire battleship, Xian Yuancheng gritted his teeth as the muscles in his body trembled nonstop. His strength and true intents of Dao techniques surged into the Starfire battleship like a tidal wave. Through the Starfire battleship's field of vision, he could see his comrades from the 10,000 spirits Immortal Sect and the 4-9 Immortal Sect falling one after another, and he was enraged by these scenes. Stronger, I want to be stronger. The power within his body was being supplied in a frenzy, and his will of the great path was being activated in a frenzy. The myriad spirit Tai Chi was able to absorb the energy of all living things in the world. Furthermore, it focused more on the yang attribute, so it could unleash explosive power in battle. Everything has a spirit, everything can explode. In the sky, around the Starfire battleship, a series of golden warheads suddenly appeared out of thin air. There were hundreds of them densely packed together. Myriad spirits Tai Chi, solar rain. The warheads fell to the ground like a golden meteor shower. Then they exploded on the ground where the snow phantom beasts were densely scattered. The terrifying energy released by each of the golden warheads could blow everything within a radius of tens of thousands of meters into smithereens. Boom, 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 boom. The explosions did not stop. Hundreds of small suns rose from the ground, illuminating everything. The earth was shaking, and the snow ghost beast was howling in pain. It was another extravagant, explosive feast. After the cannon fire subsided, the 4-9 Immortal Sect members did a rough estimation, and they were astonished to discover that over 3 million snow ghost beasts had perished in the explosion. What kind of terrifying lethality was this? Pavilion Master Xuanyuan's explosion is really terrifying. Long live Prince Charming Xuanyuan. So awesome. I love my male god to death. For a moment, Xuanyuan Cheng and his golden battleship became the center of attention. Chi, chi, chi. A few silver lines flashed through the air. A black-furred snow ghost beast that attempted to ambush the Starfire battleship was sliced into tens of thousands of pieces by Ling's spatial threads, and it didn't even get a chance to cry out before it died. Ling stood at the tip of the Starfire battleship as the final defensive barrier. Unlike the others, her eyes were filled with worry and regret as she looked at the Starfire warship. Why do you have to work so hard? Can't you control yourself a little? Actually, we can lower the firepower a little more. We can still hold on. Ling clenched her fists, and she was struck by a sense of powerlessness for the first time. If she had been a little more powerful and accumulated a little more power, Xuanyuan Cheng wouldn't have had to sacrifice himself. The Starfire battleship's cannon fire was already extremely powerful. The number of snow ghost beasts had also dwindled to around 40 million. However, the ferocious nature of the snow ghost beasts had also been awakened, and they charged into the blast zone with even more fearless ferocity before pouncing on the human cultivators around them. The 4-9 Immortal Sect and the 10,000 Spirits Immortal Sect were still suffering casualties, but they were still able to hold on due to the bombardment from the Starfire battleship. Hold on, we'll be the ones to win in the end. The cultivators fought with all their might, and the light emanating from the Starfire battleship became brighter and brighter, as if it were a sun hanging in the sky. The yin-yang diagram had also expanded to several hundred kilometers, reaching an extremely ridiculous size. Ling seemed to have detected something, and she immediately turned around with her eyes wide open. Xuanyuan Cheng, what are you doing? Stop right now. Within the core cockpit. It's not enough. I can still do more. Xuanyuan Cheng murmured to himself as a scorching aura radiated from his body. The energy within his body was being sucked away at a rapid rate, and both his cultivation base and life force fluctuations were extremely feeble due to overexertion. However, his eyes were extremely bright. As long as I kill more enemies, we'll have fewer casualties and I'll be able to kill more. Xuanyuan Cheng clenched his fists tightly as countless golden vein patterns spread over his body, instantly covering his entire body. The energy fluctuations emanating from the Starfire battleship became even more powerful, and the golden light emanating from it became even more dazzling. A scorching aura proliferated outward as terrifying heat waves surged through the air. This battleship didn't look like the Starfire battleship at all. It looked like a solar battleship. All of the exhausted disciples looked up at the dazzling battleship in the sky, and an indescribable sense of security welled up in their hearts. This light was so warm, and there was an indescribable sense of warmth within its domineering aura. They had no more energy left to fight, and they were about to die. However, their friends still had a chance to survive. They still had a chance to win this battle, and they still had a chance to protect the kingdom of the 9 states. That was enough. However, they soon noticed something unusual. They discovered that the Starfire battleship in the sky was becoming brighter and brighter. It was already very dazzling, but it continued to grow brighter as if there was no end to it. What's going on? The Starfire battleship is shining like a sun? It won't explode, right? Just as all of the cultivators were feeling confused, a familiar voice traveled over. Let the 4 sons of 9 protect the kingdom of the 9 states forever. The Starfire battleship's light finally reached its peak. Under the night sky, the golden light overshadowed all other colors, and it was as if the boundless sun was illuminating heaven and earth. At this instant, the fur of the bloodthirsty snow ghost beasts that were charging toward them suddenly became extremely bright, as if some kind of energy was about to explode. Roar? The snow ghost beasts also looked at their fur in confusion. Boom, 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 boom. A series of explosions suddenly erupted. One snow ghost beast after another began to explode on the spot. Flames and flesh flew everywhere, and anguished howls instantly reverberated throughout heaven and earth. All of the cultivators were dumbstruck by the sight of the snow ghost beasts exploding on the spot. There was an extremely large number of snow ghost beasts exploding, and their snowy white fur suddenly glowed brightly before exploding on the spot. Hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, the vast expanse of land under the night sky transformed into a boundless sea of golden light. This was a spectacular sight formed by the self-detonation of the snow ghost beasts, and it was an unforgettable sight for all of the cultivators present. For some reason, almost everyone turned their eyes toward the battleship in the sky. The golden light from the battleship shone upon the snow ghost beasts, upon which the snow ghost beasts exploded. Could a return to Void Stage Cultivator really unleash such a terrifying technique? The Tao of Myriad Spirit Tai Chi is able to establish a connection with living beings in the outside world. And Xian Yuan Cheng's Tao of Explosion is able to utilize the power of every single particle to the extreme. That's why he was able to envelop so many living beings with his spell technique and cause their bodies to completely explode on the particle level. Bai Ling murmured to herself as she looked at the scenes unfolding before her eyes. This was an extremely precise attack. It was a destructive attack that targeted all of the snow ghost beasts. The difficulty of such an attack was not something that a normal mighty figure could imagine. Bai Ling was well aware of the price that had to be paid in order to achieve such a devastating attack. The golden light had already become the only color between heaven and earth. The explosion of the snow ghost beasts was the accompaniment to this golden light. The explosion of the golden energy was extremely beautiful under the night sky, especially from a bird's eye view. It looked like a golden carpet of blooming golden flowers that extended into the distance with no end in sight. The snow ghost beasts howled in anguish as they fled in terror. They unleashed spell techniques to defend themselves, but they were unable to escape the fate of exploding on the spot. Their fate was sealed the moment they came into contact with the golden light. The explosions lasted for only a minute before coming to an end. The cultivators of the 4-9 Immortal Sect and the 10,000 Spirits Immortal Sect stared blankly at the scorched earth before them. There were no corpses strewn all over the ground. Most of the corpses had already been reduced to charcoal. The battlefield was extremely quiet, and only the sizzling sound of barbecuing could be heard. The 40 million strong army of snow ghost beasts had been completely annihilated in this one explosion. Chapter 2075. At the 10,000 Spirits Immortal Sect. The battlefield, which had been filled with shouts of killing, had fallen into a strange silence. After an unimaginable explosion, there were either dead snow ghost beasts or cultivators and enemies on the battlefield who had been too shocked to even speak. Xianyuan Cheng had put on a spectacular show for the Kingdom of the Nine States, which had almost wiped out all of the enemies and stunned all of his allies. The Starfire battleship's cannon blasts had only alleviated some of the pressure on them, but they were still suffering casualties. The enemies were still charging toward them, and they weren't sure if they would be able to hold on. But now, all of the snow ghost beasts had self-detonated, and not even the enemies were left. Xianyuan Cheng was able to unleash such a terrifying attack with the Starfire battleship. There were only a little over 1,000 snow ghost beasts left on the battlefield. Out of the tens of millions of snow ghost beasts, only a little over 1,000 remained. All of them were black-furred snow ghost beasts, as well as extremely powerful white-furred snow ghost beasts, and all of them had sustained different types of injuries. The ferocious and bloodthirsty snow ghost beasts were now as silent as chickens, completely dumbstruck by the explosion. What was going on? An army of tens of millions of snow ghost beasts had been wiped out, just like that? What kind of joke was this? Bai Ling was also extremely astonished, but she could just barely make sense of what had just happened. The Starfire battleship was a masterpiece of purple star technology, and its destructive power was comparable to that of a super mighty figure at the Tao integration pinnacle stage. Furthermore, Xianyuan Cheng's power and Tao realm were extremely compatible with the Starfire battleship, thereby allowing the Starfire battleship to unleash unimaginable power. However, the price they had to pay to unleash this attack was definitely unimaginably high. Not only Bai Ling, but most of the cultivators present had also sensed something. The Starfire battleship, which had once been as dazzling as the sun, quickly dimmed as it hovered in mid-air. Xu Honglan rose into the air and charged toward the Starfire battleship with all her might. "No, you'll be fine." She rushed into the core cockpit, and her eyes widened at the sight of the man in the transparent cockpit. Her mind had gone completely blank. The cockpit slowly opened. Xianyuan Cheng limped over to Xu Honglan with difficulty before wiping away the tears on the gorgeous woman's face. "Why are you crying? I'm still alive, right? But you are." Xu Honglan couldn't help but burst into tears as she hugged the shriveled, white-haired man who had lost all of his cultivation base. At this moment, Lu Qianhuan, Su Qianyin, Tang Shimin, and the others also rushed over. Xianyuan Cheng was also rooted to the spot as tears welled up in his eyes. Su Qianyin bit her pink lips, tears welling up in her eyes. Her impression of Xianyuan Cheng was that he was a tall, handsome, gentle, and considered genius who was respected by others. He had unlimited potential and a bright future ahead of him. But now, why did such a beautiful person become an old man who had lost all his cultivation? Cough, cough, cough. Xianyuan Cheng coughed violently and then spat out a mouthful of blood. Everyone hurriedly surrounded him and unleashed healing spell techniques upon him. "What are you all doing? Hurry up and fight. Aren't there more enemies? Don't worry about me. Really don't worry about me." Xianyuan Cheng was enraged by the sight of Su Qianyin, Tang Shimin, and the others healing him. "Don't waste so much energy on an old man like me." But you," Su Qianyin sobbed. "You don't know how powerful you are if you don't push yourself a little. I was able to sacrifice myself to save tens of millions of enemies, and that has already far exceeded my expectations. I'm already extremely happy and content. I have no regrets in this life, but you all still have things to do, so hurry up and go." Xianyuan Cheng's voice was extremely feeble, but it was also extremely gentle and calm. Everyone fell silent. Some were grieving, while others were hating their own powerlessness. Lu Qianhuan had already charged out of the Starfire battleship with killing intent surging from her body. "I'm going to cut down all of these B** stars." Boom, 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 another battle erupted. This time, it was the 4-9 Immortal Sect and 10,000 Spirits Immortal Sect's turn to retaliate. The entire army of snow ghost beasts had been wiped out, and the snow ghost beasts' advantage in numbers had been completely nullified. Over 1,000 snow ghost beasts had to face the boundless wrath of the two great sects, Lu Qianhuan, Su Qianyan, Tang Shimin, Sun Yulua, Tobias, the white-scaled wolf god Dabai. All of the return to void stage mighty figures pounced on the black-furred, snow, ghost beasts in a frenzy. This was the final battle, and it was a battle where they were going all out. Xu Honglan carried Xianyuan Cheng to the front of the Starfire battleship to survey the entire battlefield. Xianyuan Cheng said that he wanted to see the final victory of the 4-9 Immortal Sect and the 10,000 Spirits Immortal Sect. He wanted to see his sect protect the kingdom of the 9 states with his own eyes. Xu Honglan and Xianyuan Cheng made their way to the front of the battleship to witness the final moment together. All of the 4-9 Immortal Sect and 10,000 Spirits Immortal Sect disciples and elders faltered slightly upon seeing Xianyuan Cheng on the Starfire battleship before attacking the snow ghost beasts with even more ferocity. Far too many people had died on this battlefield, and they didn't even have time to grieve. All they could do was vent all of their emotions on the snow ghost beasts before them. Xianyuan Cheng had single-handedly turned the tables on the entire battlefield and completed an unprecedented feat. They weren't going to let his hard work and sacrifice go to waste. They were going to kill all of these snow ghost beasts no matter what. Energy exploded and spell techniques exploded. One powerful immortal spell after another shook heaven and earth. The snow ghost beasts were surrounded by all of the mighty figures, and they fell one after another. As time passed, regardless of whether it was the powerful white or black-furred snow ghost beasts, all of them would be slain by the combined forces of the 4-9 Immortal Sect and the 10,000 Spirits Immortal Sect. The only uncertain factor on the battlefield was the 3 golden snow ghost beasts with divine halos. They still held the upper hand. Xiao, Tu, and Xiao Zhe were still pinned to the ground, and half of their bodies had already been sealed in ice. The demonic Blood Kirin and Phoenix, Little Huang, joined forces to battle a golden snow ghost beast. Red flames and golden snowflakes clashed in the air, as if it were an epic clash of ice and fire. However, the golden storm of extreme frost was imbued with extremely peculiar laws of ice, and it was also able to completely suppress the 2 mythological beasts. Shangguan Yi and the great empress of the Snow Tribe had joined forces to battle the snow ghost beasts. Both of them loved to play with snow, but the 2 beauties were being pummeled by the snow ghost beasts to the point where they were starting to doubt their own lives. The situation on a Dao integration stage battlefield was quite grim. Even though Xianyuan Cheng had 1 foot in the grave, he was still very nervous as he watched their battle. His murky eyes stared intently at the battle taking place in the distance. Due to the fact that he had lost his cultivation base, he could only watch as the explosions took place and was completely unable to capture their movements. However, the explosions were enough for him. Chapter 2076. Xianyuan Cheng looked down at the cultivators fighting for their lives with a blank expression. Some of these people were his classmates, some were his companions who had gone through fire and water with him, and some were his fellow disciples who had sat and discussed the Tao with him. Everything made him reluctant to part with them. There were also Enlin and Su Xiaolan in Yutong City. It was a pity that he wouldn't be able to see them one last time. Xianyuan Cheng heaved a faint sigh. He was quite reluctant to part with them, but he was quite calm. Xu Honglan looped her arms around Xianyuan Cheng's neck and rested her head on Xianyuan Cheng's shoulder as she said in a pleasant voice, "Ah Cheng, I like you." Xianyuan Cheng faltered slightly upon hearing this. How many times had she confessed to him already? He recalled that he had always tried to bluff his way through without giving her a proper response. He looked at the red-clothed dancer beside him, whose face was like a beautiful flower reflecting the water and whose body was like a weak willow in the wind. Her beautiful eyes contained unprecedented firmness and passion. Xianyuan Cheng smiled. "I like you too." In that instant, all the sounds between heaven and earth seemed to have fallen silent. Shu Honglan looked at the elderly man before her, and she could vaguely see his handsome features from the past. She smiled as well. After confessing for so long, she had finally heard the answer that she had been yearning for. However, she wasn't as excited or elated as she had imagined. Perhaps it was because she had already known the answer. She had only confirmed it now. Shu Honglan pecked Xianyuan Cheng on the cheek with a blush on her face. Are you only willing to admit it because you don't have long to live? Xianyuan Cheng thought about it for a moment before shaking his head. No. Actually, if you confess to me again, I'll admit it no matter what state I'm in. Shu Honglan's mouth gaped open upon hearing this, and tears began to flow from her eyes. This was undoubtedly a massive blow to her. How could fate make a fool out of her like this? Honglan, you have to live well, Shen Yuanqing said. Don't worry, of course I'll live well. I won't do something as stupid as committing suicide for love. A rare look of determination appeared on Shu Honglan's face, and she said in a low voice, It's just that I won't be dancing anymore. There's no point in dancing without you watching over me. She could sense that Xianyuan Cheng's life force was rapidly and irreversibly fading away. Bai Ling had already tried everything she could think of, but she was still unable to save Xianyuan Cheng. It would be a lie to say that Xianyuan Cheng wasn't feeling any regret, but he was still very pleased to see that his sacrifice had created such a good opportunity for his friends and the Kingdom of the 9 States to retaliate. Just let him age quickly and then slowly die. He found himself very, very tired. He couldn't even feel the warmth from the woman's hand. Am I going to die? Pooh! Xianyuan Cheng suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart. His entire body shuddered as if he had been electrocuted, and his consciousness suddenly became a lot clearer. Even his soul, which was about to leave his body, returned to his body in fright. Then he saw a bright red flower. It was using its dark green branches to pierce into his heart, swaying its graceful body. Xiao Hong! Xianyuan Cheng exclaimed in shock. Elder Xiao Hong! Shu Honglan was also given a fright as she held Xianyuan Cheng in her arms. She had no idea when the little red flower had appeared in Xianyuan Cheng's body. A sweet voice sounded. Sai, what's going on between you two? I finally saved your father, but you look like you're about to die. What an exhausting flower! Xiao Hong grumbled in her sweet voice. If I want to save you, I'll have to bask in the sun for a long time before I can catch my breath. Xianyuan Cheng and Shu Honglan were both rooted to the spot upon hearing this. Save me? Xianyuan Cheng murmured to himself as his soul returned to his body again. Shu Honglan's eyes widened with ecstasy as she spoke in a trembling voice. Xiao Hong, why you can save Ah Cheng? Really? Can you really save him? I can, but you're more difficult to save than your father. I can only save your lifespan and cultivation base, but your Tao has been severely damaged, so I can't do anything for now, Xiao Hong replied with a forlorn expression. Xianyuan Cheng and Shu Honglan were both astonished. Not only could it save his life, but it could also save his lifespan and cultivation base? Was this supposed to be a forlorn expression? Xianyuan Cheng and Shu Honglan were about to cry tears of joy. Who would want to die if they had a chance to live? They had thought that they would be thanking the heavens if they could survive, but now even their lifespan and cultivation base could be saved. If they weren't hallucinating, then they were definitely in heaven. Shu Honglan's body trembled as she thanked Enlin over and over again. Xianyuan Cheng was expressing his gratitude, but he still kept asking if there were any side effects to Xiao Hong and whether it would be harmful to Xiao Hong. He really wanted to live, but he couldn't bring himself to sacrifice someone else's life for the sake of survival. Xiao Hong promised that this process was very taxing and tiring, but there would be no side effects. All he needed to do was bask in the sun to recover. Thus the treatment began. The faint golden light fused into Xianyuan Cheng's body, and as if it were a miracle, Xianyuan Cheng's shriveled skin regained its luster and elasticity, and his white hair became black again. Not only that, but his cultivation base was also recovering at an extremely slow rate. To Xianyuan Cheng and Xu Honglan, this was nothing short of a miracle. They couldn't understand what Xiao Hong was doing. It was so profound that they could only use the words holy F asterisk CK and bad asterisk S to describe it. There was only one thought in their minds. How could she be so bad? Asterisk. Even the knowledgeable Bai Ling was rooted to the spot, let alone Xianyuan Cheng and Xu Honglan. What Little Red was doing right now had touched upon the blind spot of her knowledge. In the past, Xianyuan Cheng's life force and cultivation base were like a candle that was constantly burning. In the end, he had already reached a point where there was nothing left to burn, and everything was reduced to light, heat, and matter that flowed into heaven and earth. Bai Ling could only gather the gas and matter released by the candle again. However, Xiao Hong was even able to recover the light and heat released by the candle. This was not something that a Tao integration stage super mighty figure could achieve. Just what else was Xiao Hong hiding? Bai Ling was starting to get curious. She discovered that Xiao Hong's journey had been very strange and inexplicable. She cultivated, she made breakthroughs, her aptitude defied the natural order, and now even her abilities were extremely strange. After a short while, a faint smile appeared on Bai Ling's face as she shook her head. The 4-9 Immortal sect had no shortage of strange things. Setting aside Enlin and Su Xiaolan, even Tina, Yiling, and Shui Zhantian were all very strange. If she really wanted to get to the bottom of everything, wouldn't she die of exhaustion? Come to think of it, she was also quite strange herself. Bai Ling looked at Xianyuan Cheng, who was becoming more and more energetic, as well as Xu Honglan, who was crying tears of joy in her arms, and a warm and enticing smile appeared on her face. 4-9 Immortal sect. What a strange and interesting place. Chapter 2077. In the eastern region of the Tai Chu continent, within Qin Shi City, streaks of pure white heavenly power crashed into the ground, blasting a series of massive craters into the ground. Countless powerful beings of the Kingdom of the 9 States United Army were reduced to nothingness. After suffering over 10 million casualties, the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army finally reached the city. The number 1 spell formation protecting Qin Shi City had already been riddled with holes by the Heavenly Human Tribe cultivators, and it was on the verge of collapse. The Celestial Arch wore a white imperial robe with golden patterns, and he stood at the forefront of the formation. His boundless aura surged like a tsunami, intimidating the 80 million strong army before him. There were 5 heavenly gods standing before him, all of whom were exuding boundless might. However, the Celestial Arch was still very calm and collected. The Celestial Arch was a seasoned veteran, so he could handle this situation. Thinking back to the time when 9 heavenly gods had suddenly appeared on the Eastern Front, his legs had almost given out from fear. Fortunately, the 4 heavenly gods under the light banner had rushed over to the Purple Star ruins as soon as the heaven-shattering pillar of light was activated. Only the 5 heavenly gods under the Supreme Sky banner remained on the battlefield. Heavenly God Eternal, Heavenly God Karma, Heavenly God Space, Heavenly God Black Mist, and Heavenly God Donglong. This was an extremely fearsome lineup, but the Celestial Arch felt like he could still hold on the Eastern Front. After all, he wasn't the only one who could oppose a heavenly god. Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake combined could oppose a heavenly god, and the only Tao integration stage true dragon of the Dragon Court of the Eastern Seas, Ao Xiao, could also just barely hold off a heavenly god. There were only 3 heavenly gods left, and the Celestial Arch felt like he could handle them. That's right, he was a bad asterisk cess who had immediately become a heavenly disciple after betraying his sect. His understanding of heaven-crushing true intent had reached an unfathomable level, and with the power of the heaven-crushing formation fighting one heavenly god would be extremely difficult. Fighting 3 heavenly gods was a bit of a stretch, but it wasn't impossible. The celestial Darch had already unleashed his paramount heaven-crushing true intent, and it was exactly because of this that the heavenly gods didn't charge in at once. Instead, they chose to wait and see. Dawn City's great formation is about to be breached. Let's attack now. The enemies in front of us are like chickens and dogs to us. The youth with 2 dark green spikes hanging from his waist said with a smile. His eyes were filled with arrogance and disdain. We can't. The enemies before us look very weak, but they definitely have a lot of trump cards up their sleeves. We're still in danger of losing. I suggest we wait and see and force the enemies to reveal their trump cards first. The silver-haired girl with a golden tortoise shell on her back said calmly. The 2 in front of him were divine, heaven-stage, heavenly humans, heavenly god Donglong and heavenly god Black Mist. Why are you still so cowardly? Don't you think being a coward is a disgrace to Empyrean gods? Empyrean god Eastlong pursed his lips. What do you know? This is called, if the enemy doesn't move, I won't move. If the enemy moves, I'll move. I can come and go as I please, and I can see the situation clearly. I have a firm grasp of the battlefield. Empyrean god Black Mist's head was half retracted into his golden turtle shell. He stared at the city walls of the Kingdom of Dawn with his dead fish eyes and spoke in an extremely calm and unhurried voice. Empyrean god Donglong snorted disdainfully upon hearing this. He turned to stare at the celestial Darch on the city wall and grinned. Then you can continue hiding here. I'm going up. Right at this moment, a tall and handsome man with long, black hair stepped forward and stood in front of Empyrean god Donglong. Wait a little longer. Empyrean god Donglong's arrogant expression finally receded slightly upon seeing the man before him. The heavenly space god was the leader of the group of heavenly gods. When there was a disagreement, this black-haired man had the greatest authority to make the final decision. Black Mist's idea is actually quite good. We just need to intimidate those top-tier powerful beings here. As for the rest of the Human Tribe United Army, the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army that we've sent out is more than enough to crush them. The heavenly space god wasn't afraid of the enemies before them. However, the situation before them wasn't worthy of their attention. It wasn't wise to unleash 5 trump cards right from the start. They had to see what the enemy was going to do first, then crush them one step at a time. They had to strike the enemy into despair before killing them. That was the correct strategy. The heavenly space god enjoyed this process very much. Empyrean god Donglong repressed his urge to attack and glanced at his comrades beside him. A young girl was huddled in her golden turtle shell, staring blankly at the city wall in the distance. There was also a chubby child who was stuffing food into his mouth. His eyes were constantly glancing up at the sky, as if he was completely unconcerned about the battle taking place in front of him. The last one was even worse. Not only was he not talking, but he was also not moving. He was a peaceful-looking statue with his hands maintaining a strange hand seal. There was a benevolent expression on his face. The statue hovered motionlessly in the air. If it weren't for the crimson divine halo above his head, one would really think that this was just an ordinary statue. Black Mist, Karma, Eternity. Each of his comrades was weirder than the last. Donglong collected his thoughts and turned his gaze to the Sky Emperor standing proudly at the top of the city wall. He said, disdainfully, "That lowly human really got off easy. Look at his arrogant appearance. He really thinks he's somebody. Does he really think he can block our attack by himself?" This was a false accusation against the Celestial Darch. The Celestial Darch merely wanted to strike an ordinary pose. He wasn't arrogant enough to think that he could stop all of the heavenly gods on his own. He just wanted to stop 3 of them. The battle on the battlefield became more and more intense. The battle between the Kingdom of the 9 States United Army and the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army had reached a climax. Countless living beings were dying every second, and this was the first time the Celestial Arch had witnessed such an intense battle. All types of powerful spell techniques were unleashed upon the world under the night sky, bathing heaven and earth in vibrant colors. All types of enlightened beings were summoned. Projections of massive beasts appeared between heaven and earth, and a series of extremely powerful spell techniques were unleashed. This was truly a dreamlike scene that shook the mind. However, behind this dreamy and shocking battlefield was an endless amount of blood and death. Anyone, including Tao integration stage super mighty figures, could perish on this battlefield. The Celestial Arch turned toward his 7 precious daughters, Tianshou, Tianyang, Tianrong, Tianchang, Tianxian, Tianqing, and Tianyu. All of them had reached return to Void Stage, Celestial Immortal, and they were the main force on this battlefield. They spared no effort in fighting. Their blood stained their clothes, which were shrouded in celestial aura, and their beautiful faces. There were even terrifying spells that left glaring and ugly wounds on their bodies, but they did not show any fear or retreat. Instead, they became more and more courageous as they fought. The 7 celestial maidens were like peerlessly beautiful flowers blooming between heaven and earth, perfectly illustrating to all of the immortals what it meant to be a heroine. The Celestial Arch couldn't help but sigh with emotion upon seeing this. I wanted to have a son in the past, but now that I think about it, having so many daughters isn't so bad. Chapter 2078. Night had completely fallen. The bright moon hung high in the sky, and the river of stars shone brilliantly. The final battle in Dawn City had only just begun. The 40 million strong kingdom of the 9 States United Army and the 80 million strong Heavenly Human Tribe United Army were both unleashing spell techniques with all their might. Everyone could be injured or even killed in this battle, and the 7 fairy maidens were no exception. The celestial Thearcha's heart ached at the sight of his injured daughters, but he wouldn't stop them from entering the battlefield, as this was their own choice. At this time, there were only 2 types of cultivators in the kingdom of the 9 states: warriors and cowards. There were cowards holed up in the kingdom of the 9 states, waiting for other cultivators to join the battle. Of course, there were even more warriors who raised their weapons and fought back. Whoosh! A pure white heavenly sword suddenly descended from the sky, tearing through the earth for over 100 miles. Countless small mountains were cleaved in half, and over 10,000 living beings who were engaged in battle were swept up in it. Big sis. Damn it, the expressions of the other 6 celestial maidens changed. A red-robed fairy maiden's arm was severed by the heavenly sword, and her body was struck by the sword chi, causing her to vomit blood and tumble to the ground. The injured celestial maiden was none other than the leader of the 7 celestial maidens, Celestial Maiden Longevity. And the one who made a move was actually a Heaven Enlightenment Realm Marshal. Heaven Pioneer Stage Heavenly Human Tribe Mighty Figures were a nightmare for the vast majority of return to Void Stage Mighty Figures. After all, it was no exaggeration that they were invincible below the Tao integration stage. Most of the Heaven Pioneer Stage great generals on the battlefield were being suppressed by Tao integration stage super mighty figures, but there were bound to be some who slipped through. This Heaven Pioneer Stage great general was no exception. Oh, you actually managed to block my sword and not die? A male marshal with fluttering black hair and a cold expression suddenly gave a sinister smile as he looked at the beautiful woman in red, whose robes had been sliced open by his sword chi. What a beautiful woman! I'm really looking forward to seeing her die. As he spoke, a hint of excitement flashed across his eyes. He took a step forward and quickly pounced toward Celestial Maiden Tianshou. Ha ha ha! Fear, cry, beg for mercy under me! The male marshal smiled in a somewhat morbid manner. He was passionate about destroying all beautiful things, and he was even more passionate about destroying all beautiful things after they had lost their dignity. However, what disappointed him was that even though the woman in red in the distance was heavily injured and on the verge of death, her face did not show any signs of wanting to beg for mercy. Her extremely gorgeous face revealed a wisp of ruthlessness instead, as if she wanted to bite back before she died. "Stop! Let go of my big sister!" A blue-robed celestial maiden charged over from the side, wielding an icy blue immortal sword as she slashed it toward the male marshal. Wherever the blade of the sword passed, the surrounding void was frozen. Oh, another little beauty? In the face of the celestial maiden's attack, the male great general was not enraged. Instead, he was elated, and a smile appeared on his face. His eyes roamed over the celestial maiden's body in an unscrupulous manner, and his pure white holy sword tore through the frozen space before unleashing another sword strike toward the celestial maiden. Rip! The white sword projection pierced through the frosty sword chi and struck the woman's chest. Puff! A ghastly sword wound appeared on the woman's snow-white skin. She spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying backwards. The male marshal licked his lips. Beautiful things are indeed very moving when they die. He made his way over to the blue-robed celestial maiden to finish her off. "Don't you dare hurt my big sister and big sister 6. A crisp, enraged voice sounded from behind him. The male great general's smile became even more elated. Here they go again. One celestial maiden after another ran over. Was the Calabash brothers saving their grandpa? He was so blessed to see so many celestial maidens wailing in agony beneath his feet. The male great general turned around to look at the celestial maiden behind him with his holy sword in hand. He was then greeted by the sight of an immortal crane hurtling toward him. This was a tall and slender crane with pristine white feathers. Most importantly, it had a pair of mysterious bulging eyes that were even larger than its head. The male great general was a little dumbstruck upon seeing this. He had thought that he would encounter a celestial maiden after turning around, but he ended up encountering this weirdo. Just as he was rooted to the spot, the large-eyed immortal crane's wings had already torn through space before slashing toward the male great general's neck and waist. It was as fast as a return to Void Stage Sword Immortal, who had been practicing the way of the sword for many years. The large-eyed immortal crane was extremely fast, but the male great general was even faster. The male marshal drew a perfect arc with the pure white holy sword in his hand, and the sword projection arrived first, instantly slicing the ambushing large-eyed crane in half. Do you really think a mere return to Void Stage, Celestial Immortal, can harm me?" The male heavenly god chuckled coldly. However, when the immortal crane was sliced in half and reduced to ink, its 2 watermelon-like eyeballs did not turn into ink. The eyes were black and white, and the whites of the eyes were bloodshot. They were extremely sinister as they stared at the male heavenly god. Then they suddenly flew toward his face. Crap! The male heavenly god suddenly discovered that the immortal crane's eyeballs were its true body. Right at this moment, a piercing light erupted from the immortal crane's eyeballs. Boom! The 2 eyeballs exploded at the same time. The explosion was earth-shattering. Terrifying energy was imbued with twisted heaven-crushing true intent, engulfing everything in the surrounding area. A beautiful woman in a plain Taoist robe was slowly sent flying back by the shock waves of the explosion. Her robes fluttered lightly as she stared intently at the explosion before her. Did it work? The woman was none other than Celestial Maiden Tianyu. The large-eyed crane immortal technique that she had comprehended could be said to be a top-tier assassination technique, and it was often able to achieve surprising results. Countless powerful enemies had died to this technique, but her opponent was a Heaven Pioneer Stage Great General, so she really wasn't sure how effective it would be. Whoosh! A white sword projection suddenly tore through the flames before hurtling toward Celestial Maiden Tianyu's head at an extremely fast speed. Tianyu's expression shifted and she hurriedly evaded. However, the sword was simply too fast, and she managed to evade a lethal strike. However, the sword still punctured her shoulder, and blood splattered through the air. She let loose a pain cry and was just about to retreat. At this moment, a figure tore through the flames and pounced toward her. "How dare you injure me? How dare you injure me? I'm going to kill you." The male great general's robes were in tatters, and his body was a mangled mess of blood and flesh. Many parts of his skin had been charred black, but his insane and terrifying aura clearly indicated that his current combat prowess was no joke. Imperial Seal Palm. Celestial Maiden Tianyu gritted her teeth as she unleashed a palm toward the male great general. A golden palm imbued with boundless power crashed toward the oncoming man. The male great general slashed out with his pure white holy sword, slicing the imperial seal palm in half. Immediately afterward, he slashed Tianyu into the ground. What kind of **TTY imperial seal palm is this? The male great general spat out a mouthful of blood as he looked at the fallen celestial maiden Tianyu. A cruel smile appeared on his face as he said, "How dare you blow me up? I'm going to slice open your soft, white body bit by bit and slice you 108 times in a row until you're reduced to pieces. Then I'll grant you death." Before he had a chance to finish his sentence, a hand appeared out of nowhere and grabbed onto his head. Boom! The male great general's head was slammed viciously into the ground, and he felt as if his head were about to explode from the excruciating pain. He struggled, and he saw an extremely tall and broad figure standing before him. This figure exuded a peerless aura, as if it were threatening to crush the entire heavens. The man's hand was gripping onto his head as if he were crushing an ant, and his life could be taken at any moment. The celestial Dharch. The male heavenly god's arrogance and madness had completely disappeared. Instead, his face was filled with boundless shock and horror. "I heard. You said my imperial seal palm is ****. The celestial Dharch chuckled as boundless golden light erupted from his palm. "Then I'll give you a taste of ***TTY. No, no." The male great general yelled in shock and horror. Bam! The celestial Thearka's palm crushed the great general's head. The celestial Dharch clapped his hands together and stood up as if he had done something insignificant. Celestial maiden Tianyu fell to the ground and stared blankly at the celestial Dharch. Her mouth gaped open as she spoke in a soft voice. "Father!" Chapter 2079. The celestial Dharch looked at his daughter and gently helped her up with a smile. "Xiaozi, you have to be careful next time. Stay away from areas with Heaven Pioneer stage great generals. Leave enemies of this level to the Tao integration stage." Celestial maiden Tianyu pursed her lips and nodded earnestly. At this time, the 5 figures had already surrounded the celestial Dharch. Their combined might was like the wrath of the heavens, causing all the living beings in the surroundings to tremble and lower their heads. "Celestial Dharch, you finally made your move." The voice was indifferent, but it was imbued with boundless divine might. "We've been waiting for this moment for a long time. Seeing as you voluntarily entered the battlefield, it means that you're ready to fight us, right? A father's love is like a mountain." A series of voices sounded from all directions, creating a sense that there was nowhere to run. Celestial maiden Tianyu's face paled at the sight of the 5 figures that had suddenly appeared. The 5 in front of him were the 5 heavenly gods of the enemy. They had finally made their move. "Father, I'm sorry. It's all my fault." Tears welled up in celestial maiden Tianyu's eyes, and her face was filled with remorse and remorse. She knew that these heavenly gods were targeting the celestial Dharch. If it weren't for saving her, why would the celestial Dharch personally enter this battlefield and then be surrounded by 5 heavenly gods? "It's not your fault. I'll fight the heavenly gods one day. This is just an opportunity." The celestial Thearka's expression didn't change much. Instead, he patted celestial maiden Tianyu's shoulder with a gentle smile. "Go, Xiaozi. Get away from here." Father, take care." Celestial maiden Tianyu pursed her lips and looked at the celestial Dharch with a meaningful gaze before flying into the distance. She knew that she would only be a burden even if she stayed here. The best way was to get away from the battlefield so that the celestial Darch wouldn't have to worry about her. The heavenly gods ignored celestial Maiden Tianyu. At their level, a return to void stage celestial immortal wouldn't be able to do anything. The celestial Darch looked at Tianyu's departing figure with a complex expression. He had thought that he would be able to repress his emotions on this battlefield where people were constantly sacrificing themselves. He would be able to suppress the urge to save anyone who was in mortal danger. However, just as immortal Tianyu was about to be killed, he realized that he was wrong. He could not stand by and watch as immortal Tianyu was sacrificed. He was still not qualified to be the celestial emperor. The celestial Darch let out an imperceptible sigh. Since things had come to this, they could only start a war. He looked at the 5 heavenly deities in front of him, and an extremely powerful aura erupted from his body. A white pillar of light soared into the sky, and endless power descended from the sky, perfectly fusing into his body. The expressions of the other heavenly gods changed. They discovered that the celestial emperor could borrow more power of heaven than they, who were born from the heavenly Tao. The celestial Darch was supposed to be the most important person in the mending of the heavens. However, after Niua took in Lin and Lil Hongling, he successfully became a substitute. However, this wasn't bad either. He could stay here and protect the human race and the 9 prefectures wholeheartedly. The celestial Thearcha's mind was clear, and his cultivation level, which had already touched the threshold of the god of creation stage, faintly loosened a little. A mighty force descended from the sky and fused into the man's body. He exuded a unique and powerful aura, and his imperial robe fluttered in the wind. With his hands clasped behind his back, he looked at the 5 heavenly gods with a calm and indifferent expression. The celestial Darch was clearly looking up at the heavenly gods, but he seemed to be looking down on them. The kingdom of the 9 states coalition army was astonished upon seeing this. My God, the celestial Darch is facing 5 heavenly gods alone? So powerful. The celestial Thearcha's aura seems to be even more powerful than the 5 heavenly gods combined. Is this the aura of a powerful being? The celestial Darch was clearly at a disadvantage, but everyone could see that not only was the celestial Thearcha's figure becoming more and more imposing, but they also felt that he was about to win. The 5 heavenly gods also felt that something was amiss. Why was the celestial Thearcha's aura so powerful? It felt like it wasn't the 5 of them surrounding the celestial Darch, but rather the celestial Darch surrounding all 5 of them. This wasn't right. Heavenly God Donglong was the angriest. He was an extremely arrogant person. So how could he tolerate the celestial Thearcha's extreme posturing? He immediately shouted angrily, Celestial Darch, today is your doomsday. Feel despair. The celestial Darch looked at him with an indifferent expression, and a gentle and calm smile appeared on his face. His authoritative and reliable voice spread throughout the entire battlefield. 5 heavenly gods against me, and you still dare to be so confident? Do you really think there's no one left in the kingdom of the 9 states coalition army? His heroic words reverberated throughout heaven and earth. Fighting spirit was ignited in the hearts of all the mighty figures. Black Spirit Snake, White Spirit Snake, and Ao Xiao seemed to have understood something, and they hurried toward the battlefield where the celestial Darch was. Do you really think there's no one left in the kingdom of the 9 states coalition army? That's some kind of hint. The celestial Darch used a unique method to send a distress signal. It was not only very impressive, but it was also able to arouse the fighting spirit of his allies. The 3 exquisite beauties who rushed toward the celestial Darch were all in awe of him. A few more flies. Heavenly God Donglong gripped the spike on his waist tightly with both hands as he chuckled coldly. Leave it to me. The chubby boy who was stuffing food into his mouth spoke in a muffled voice. His body flashed, and he flew toward Ao Xiao and the others, clearly planning to block all 3 attackers by himself. The celestial Darch instantly felt the pressure on him increase upon seeing this. He had thought that he would be able to hold on for a while if he fought 3 alone, but now he had to fight 4 alone. I'll be the vanguard. Heavenly God Dong Long chuckled coldly as a divine halo appeared above his head. Divine halos also appeared on his arms. He had already used 3 divine halos before the battle had even begun. The heavenly god that was a statue of a divine spirit spoke telepathically. Then I'll be responsible for adapting to the situation. You guys go. In his eyes, this celestial Darch was not worthy of 4 heavenly gods attacking at the same time. The celestial Darch was almost moved to tears upon hearing this. This was divine assistance. Eternal heavenly God, since you've decided to attack, you have to give it your all. Don't slack off. Let's attack together. A delicate and pretty young girl with a golden turtle shell on her back stretched out her body as she spoke with an extremely serious expression. Heavenly God Black Mist, who had been a coward just a while ago, was now very proactive. All right, the statue replied indifferently. It clearly didn't care. It was only participating in the battle to end the battle earlier. The celestial Darch didn't know what to say upon seeing this. His emotions were on a roller coaster ride, but his expression remained calm and collected. The battle had begun, and it was already 4 against 1. The celestial Darch was extremely flustered. Right at this moment, a blood-curdling cry suddenly erupted in the distance. That was the heavenly god Karma's anguished cry. All the heavenly gods' hearts jolted, and they all turned toward the source of the cry. Then they discovered to their astonishment that the heavenly god Karma was being beaten up by 3 women one after another. Chapter 2080. Black Spirit Snake slashed her realm creation, evil vanquishing, sword viciously toward the heavenly Karma god, and a golden sword projection erupted into the sky, knocking the little fatty back several dozen kilometers. Before the little fatty had a chance to catch his breath, White Spirit Snake had already appeared behind him with her yin and yang dual swords in hand. The black and white dual swords intertwined to form an extremely sharp blade, which tore through the heavenly Karma god's heavenly god defenses and left a crimson gash on his body. Ah, die. The little fatty let loose a wail of anguish before his eyes suddenly turned red, and he thrust his palms toward Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake. Karma! Boom! A burst of invisible yet extremely terrifying mighty power descended from heaven and earth before striking Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake's bodies in a stealthy yet ferocious manner. The power of Karma, especially the power of Karma that was triggered by the heavenly Tao, was extremely elusive, and normal Tao integration stage super mighty figures wouldn't even be able to detect its existence. However, Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake slashed their swords through the air at the same time, and a burst of power suddenly descended from the heavenly Tao before injecting itself into the blades of their swords, severing the invisible Karma. The heavenly Karma god was dumbstruck. How could this be? You can also borrow the power of the heavenly Tao. The little fatty was still in a state of shock when the red-robed Ao Xiao appeared beside him. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her aura was indiscernible, as if she were in a deep slumber. However, her little fist had already descended lightly. The heavenly Karma god felt like there was nowhere to hide in that instant. Bam! The fist twisted the little fatty's round face, and his body was sent flying like a round ball. Black Spirit Snake and White Spirit Snake took advantage of this opportunity to unleash a torrential downpour of sword strikes, tearing at the little fatty's body. The pitiful heavenly Karma god didn't even get a chance to retaliate as his blood-curdling cries erupted throughout heaven and earth. These 3 women were far more powerful than the heavenly Karma god had imagined, and the heavenly Karma god was completely powerless against them. Save me! Save me! The heavenly Karma god yelled at his heavenly god teammates. The other 4 heavenly deities were all speechless. They had accumulated their imposing aura with great difficulty, planning to give the enemy a fatal blow, but in the end their own allies were the first to ask for help? To think that the fatty had confidently said that he would take care of the 3 women, but in less than 2 minutes he was already screaming with a bloody nose and swollen face. The face of Cami had been completely lost by this fellow. The girl with the golden tortoise shell on her back poked her head out of the shell to look at the women and said with a shocked expression, "These 3 women are so fierce." The heavenly space god's expression was the most grave. All 3 of them are quite extraordinary. To think that they can all borrow the power of the heavens to battle. The first 2 had used the power bestowed upon them by the heavenly Tao after they had mended the sky. As for the last dragon tribe female, she borrowed the power of the heavenly Tao by merging her body with heaven and earth. Their battle style is completely different from the powerful beings of the heaven-crushing sect, but their power is still extremely terrifying. "I'll go help the heavenly karma god," the eternal heavenly god said indifferently. The heavenly space god nodded. The eternal heavenly god began to fly toward Ao Xiao. Ao Xiao was sleeping while pummeling the little fatty. All of a sudden, heaven and earth fell deathly silent, regardless of whether it was the air or vital energy or matter. Everything became motionless, as if it had been frozen into an eternal image. The divine spirit statue flew toward Ao Xiao from behind. It was still completely motionless, as if it had been struck by a rock. However, a gray spear had appeared in the statue's hand, and the tip of the spear was aimed directly at Ao Xiao's head. Ao Xiao's movements were frozen to the spot. Even her black hair, which danced in the air, had become as still as a painting, as if it had been frozen in time. It would never decay, it would never change, and it would forever maintain a single state. Eternity represented the stillness of heaven and earth. Only the eternal heavenly God had the right to change this state of eternity. In other words, the eternal heavenly God was the ruler of this realm. The spear flew through the air, and the eternal heavenly God felt as if he could already envision the scene of Ao Xiao's head exploding into a bloody flower. However, in that instant, it was as if he were in a dream. The woman in red, whose back was facing it, had already turned around at some point. Her head shifted in a flash, dodging the spearhead stab. Her eyes were still closed, and she was still in a deep slumber. The only difference was that the eternal heavenly God was astonished to discover that it felt as if it had been forcibly dragged into a dream. Even though it had only been an instant, many things had already changed. For example, not only had the woman in red struggled free from its eternal shackles, she had also evaded its attack, and her fist had already crashed viciously into its face. The power of heaven and earth combined with the power to destroy all things came crashing down. Not only was Ao Xiao able to conform to the heavenly Tao, but she had also learned the heaven-crushing true intent and had even been invited by the ancient Dragon Empress to become the heavenly disciple's attendant. Even though she had turned down the offer without any hesitation, it was quite clear that her heaven-crushing true intent was definitely not bad. Bam! An earth-shattering explosion erupted. Ao Xiao's agonized wail immediately followed. Ow! Ow, ow, ow! Ao Xiao's fist crashed into the statue's face, only to be struck by the stone statue's solid surface. Her fist became bright red, and she almost woke up from her slumber from the pain. Hee hee! Do you really think you can defeat me just because you've broken through my eternal domain? Don't forget that I am the eternal heavenly God. My body is eternal and indestructible. You won't be able to harm even a single hair on my head. The eternal heavenly God's mighty voice reverberated through heaven and earth as he stabbed his spear toward Ao Xiao. Ao Xiao had entered a deep slumber hack mode, and her body was as fast as a ghost as she perfectly evaded all of the eternal heavenly God's attacks. She seemed to possess the ability to predict her opponent's movements, and she was able to evade each and every one of the eternal heavenly God's attacks. The eternal heavenly God became more and more astonished as he fought. How was it that she was able to see through all of his attacks? It was understandable if it was any other living being, but this was the eternal heavenly God. The will of the heavens was unfathomable. So how was Ao Xiao able to predict his attacks time and time again? The eternal heavenly God suddenly came to a realization as he looked at the snoring Ao Xiao. The will of the heavens was indeed unfathomable. But what if it was the heavens? Ao Xiao had only sent a message to the heavens to kill the eternal heavenly God before leaving everything to the heavens, which meant that the heavens were using Ao Xiao's body to battle the eternal heavenly God. The eternal heavenly God understood. No wonder Ao Xiao was able to see through his attacks time and time again. She was fighting herself. Chapter 2081. The eternal heavenly God and Ao Xiao fell into a stalemate. Ao Xiao couldn't break through the eternal heavenly God's defenses, and the eternal heavenly God couldn't hit Ao Xiao. On the other side of the battlefield, the heavenly karma god was finally able to catch her breath without Ao Xiao's lethal punches. She was also able to retaliate against black spirit snake and white spirit snake's combined attacks. The celestial Darch finally heaved a sigh of relief upon being surrounded by 3 heavenly gods. He clasped his hands behind his back as an unfathomable light appeared in his eyes. 3 mere heavenly gods want to kill me? Stop flexing. You're just a piece of Tao integration stage trash. Die. Empyrean God Donglong had long found the celestial Darch an eyesore. He silently activated his 8 divine halos and let out an explosive roar. The 2 dark green spikes in his hands tore through the void and instantly pierced toward the face of the Emperor of the Celestial Court. The dark green tips were like 2 dragons and snakes that attacked from strange and tricky angles. Moreover, they contained the supreme divine might of the heavenly Tao. Wherever the sharp tips passed, the space would distort and melt because of the toxic corrosion. Tao integration stage trash? The celestial Thearcha's eyes were devoid of emotion as he looked at the oncoming venomous spikes. He suddenly stretched out his palms, upon which a fine net of countless black lines appeared over his palms, catching the 2 spikes with extreme precision before firmly grasping them in his hands. How is this possible? Heavenly God Donglong's expression shifted. This sky poison spike was his signature move. After activating all 8 of his divine halos, he was confident that he could insta-kill all Tao integration stage beings. However, his opponent had caught it with his bare hands. He could sense that the celestial Thearcha's hands were like a boundless net made of black lines that could imprison the entire sky. A nomological power that conforms to the heavenly Tao. Empyrean God Eastlong, through the power of the eternal truth, was able to clearly see the essence of the celestial Thearcha's attack. Just as he was about to break free from the celestial Thearcha's restraints, a foot landed on his lower abdomen. A terrifying power came crashing down, as if wanting to destroy his entire existence. Heavenly Emperor's kick, rumble. Terrifying golden light exploded, covering the sky for hundreds of miles. A true intent of the Tao realm that wanted to break through the heavens surged between heaven and earth. Heaven crushing true intent and borrowing the power of the heavens perfectly fused together to unleash an unimaginable power. Empyrean God Eastlong let out an agonized cry as he was sent flying. His body had caved in from the kick, and it felt as though all the bones in his body had been shattered by an enormous force. This scene stunned everyone on the battlefield. As expected of the number 1 combat power of the Celestial Court, the Celestial Emperor, he has the absolute advantage right from the start. The Heavenly Emperor is so powerful, beating up heavenly deities and raising the power of our human race. So what if there are many Empyrean gods? They will still be oppressed by the Celestial Emperor. In the beginning, the coalition army of the 9 provinces were still deeply worried about the approaching Empyrean gods. But now that they saw the Sky Emperor display his invincible might, even sending the Empyrean gods flying with a single kick. They all began to shout out in reverence. "Humph, do you think you're qualified to look down on Tao integration?" The celestial Darch looked at Empyrean god Donglong, who had been sent flying by the kick, and smirked. His figure flickered, intending to pursue Empyrean god Donglong relentlessly. Right at this moment, space suddenly froze. A tall, handsome, black-haired man descended from the sky. He spread open his arms and made a grabbing motion toward the nearby celestial Darch. He was like a god who was in control of everything. As he stepped forward, spatial ripples spread out like water wherever he passed. An extremely powerful spatial restriction instantly bound the celestial Darch to the spot. The heavenly space god had made her move. The celestial Darch had never experienced such a powerful spatial restriction before. He wanted to tear open space and break free, but he discovered that the space around him was like an impenetrable fortress. Its toughness was on a completely different level compared to the spatial restrictions he had encountered in the past. In the instant that the celestial Darch was bound, the young woman with the golden turtle shell on her back had already spun around and slammed the tough turtle shell viciously into the celestial Thearka's back. A vast and boundless energy surged forth, threatening to pulverize the celestial Thearka's body into dust. F***CKU, Empyrean god Black Mist spoke in an indifferent voice. PFFF. The celestial Darch threw up a mouthful of blood, and his body was bent into the shape of a bow as he crashed into the ground. Empyrean god Black Mist did not stop there. Instead, he continued to crash toward the celestial Darch. Two purple divine halos appeared at the front and back of the turtle shell, creating an absolute gravitational and impact suppression. It was as if a mountain weighing hundreds of millions of tons was crashing down upon the celestial Darch. Boom! The ground was crushed by the golden turtle shell, and the terrifying gravitational force caused the entire ground to cave in for several hundred meters. The celestial Darch was trapped at the center of the crater, and he was being crushed by the golden turtle shell. The purple gravitational force expanded for over 500 kilometers, immobilizing all things into the ground. The young woman emerged from the turtle shell, and she looked down at the celestial Darch with a cold expression. Is the divine turtle-crushing pressure ferocious? The celestial Darch could feel boundless pressure crushing down upon his body, as if the heavens were falling and the earth itself were crumbling. This indescribable pressure struck despair into the hearts of the onlookers, and he was struck by the ferocious power of the divine, turtle-crushing pressure. The celestial Thearka's internal organs began to rupture and bleed, and cracks began to appear all over his body. If this continued, he was most likely going to be crushed to death by the turtle shell. It is very ferocious, but to me, the celestial Darch braced his hands against the ground and raised his head with difficulty. His eyes reflected the heavens as a white fluorescent light erupted from his body. At the same time, the golden turtle shell on the celestial Thearka's back suddenly began to shake violently. Black mist furrowed her brows, and she suddenly wrapped her arms and legs around the celestial Thearka's body as she pressed the golden turtle shell against the celestial Thearka's back. Heavier, heavier, heavier. Boom, boom, boom. The golden turtle shell continued to fall like a sledgehammer, and the celestial Thearka's body was pressed into the ground step by step. Just the gravitational force alone was enough to distort the rocky ground within a radius of 500 kilometers, and it even affected the operation of Dawn City's spell formation. The suppressive force released by the black mist goddess became even stronger, but the celestial Thearka's hands were still braced against the ground. His imperial robes fluttered even though there was no wind, and the veins on his fair skin were bulging. Divine light erupted from his body, and he was as dazzling as the sun. I told you not to look at me the way you used to look at me. The one standing in front of you now is the celestial Darch slowly propped himself up like a giant dragon that was about to awaken from its slumber. His aura surged outward like a huge wave, and it became more and more terrifying. A celestial darch who has no restraints or scruples. Boom! White divine light, filled with boundless heavenly powers, soared into the skies, violently blasting Empyrean, God, black mist away. The celestial darch was bathed in white divine light, and he spread open his arms as he slowly rose into the air. In that instant, it was as if the heavens were welcoming a paramount being. Countless white divine patterns flashed all over his body, and each and every one of them seemed to resonate with the pulse of heaven and earth, representing the heartbeat of heaven and earth. Thump, thump, thump. Everything between heaven and earth seemed to be resonating with him, and everything between heaven and earth seemed to be listening to his commands. All of the energy between heaven and earth began to form a massive vortex that converged around the celestial Thearcha's body. The three heavenly gods were all astonished as they stared at the celestial darch with dumbstruck expressions. Are you kidding me? The celestial darch can become more powerful? Didn't the intelligence report say that the celestial Thearcha's limit was 2 heavenly gods? What's going on? Impossible. This must be some kind of technique to intimidate the enemy. The celestial darch took a light step forward as he listened to the discussions of the heavenly gods. All of the energy on the battlefield suddenly began to move, and it transformed into a boundless rainbow cloud that trailed behind him like a cloak of energy. All of the heavenly gods' eyelids twitched upon seeing this. A faint smile appeared on the celestial Thearcha's elegant and dignified face. I've been suppressing my own power this entire time in order to preserve my most perfect self for the moment when the heavens are mended. But now the heavens don't need my help anymore. Then I'll leave my most perfect self for all of you. Chapter 2082. The celestial darch was once the #1 disciple of the heaven-mending sect. He shouldered the heavy responsibility of repairing the heavenly Tao and protecting the peace and stability of the world. No matter where he was, he had to leave his final trump card in heaven mending. But now, little Hongling had replaced him in heaven mending, and he was no longer restricted. He could finally use all of his power to fight against his enemies. Rumble, a huge amount of energy on the battlefield began to flow along with the celestial Thearcha's movements. The celestial darch was bathed in boundless white light, appearing majestic and dazzling. The heavenly human tribe, powerful beings within a radius of a few thousand kilometers, suddenly discovered that they were no longer able to borrow the power of the heavens. It wasn't that their abilities were restricted. Rather, it was that the power of the heavens in this area had all been used by the celestial darch. They no longer had any control over it. Not only was the power of the heavens restricted, but even the vital energy within a very large area of the battlefield was also under the control of that man. At this moment, only the man bathed in the light of the heavens was the true ruler. Extreme of the heavens, Emperor reigns over the heavens. The celestial darch waved a hand, and boundless white light of the heavens obeyed the man's command, crashing toward the 3 heavenly gods nearby. This was an extremely terrifying power of the heavens that encompassed an extremely large area. The 3 heavenly gods stood in midair and felt as if they were facing an entire ocean of power of the heavens crashing down on them. There was no way for them to dodge, and they could only take it head-on. Heavenly God Black Mist retracted his entire body into his turtle shell without hesitation. Heavenly God Donglong let out an enraged roar and chose to go against the current. He gripped the pair of dark green spikes in his hands, which shot toward the celestial darch with an extremely sharp light. The boundless white power of the heavens was torn in half by the sharp light. The heavenly space god spread his arms out, and a prismatic space that seemed to be constructed from countless transparent mirrors enveloped his entire body. He was like a small boat in the face of the surging power of the heavens. However, the power of the heavens released by the celestial darch was not so easy to deal with. In this area, the celestial darch reigned supreme, and it crashed toward the 3 heavenly gods in a frenzy. Apart from that, there was also a colorful energy that also crashed toward the three heavenly gods at the same time. The three heavenly deities only felt as if the entire world was filled with boundless energy. They roared and howled, as if the heavens were raging with absolute fury, and they wouldn't stop until they killed the other party. The three heavenly gods were caught in the middle and had no chance of escaping. We have to hold on. There's definitely a time limit to his sudden increase in power. We just have to endure it. The heavenly space god tried her best to encourage her teammates. Empyrean god Black Mist hid within his turtle shell, not saying a single word as he trembled. The most ferocious of them all was Empyrean god Eastlong. He wielded his twin spikes in his hands, tearing apart the countless streams of energy that were charging towards him. He did his best to swim against the flow of energy, slowly but surely closing the distance between him and the Celestial Emperor. Why are you able to control such pure heaven power? What right do you have to borrow the power of the heavenly Tao to deal with us? This is our power. Heavenly God Dong Long gritted his teeth and walked forward. He glared at the Celestial Darch, his face filled with humiliation and anger. The Celestial Darch was a little surprised to see the young man rushing toward him with all his might. He didn't think that he would be so tenacious and still want to attack even now. This Empyrean god Eastlung was proud, arrogant, and looked down on others. However, it had to be said that he did have some merits. At the very least, he was able to choose to attack unyieldingly even after the Celestial Darch had unleashed such terrifying power. The two dark green spikes tore open a passage in the midst of the massive amount of heaven power and boundless energy, leading to the Heavenly Emperor's location. They were heaven-defying. The Celestial Darch laughed. He admired this kind of enemy, because this kind of enemy had no limits. He was very easy to deal with. Ignorant child. The Celestial Darch pointed a finger at the struggling Empyrean god Eastlung. A portion of the surging heaven power in the surroundings suddenly condensed and contracted. As Empyrean god Eastlung's eyes widened, it shrank by a few hundred times and then shot out. Not good. Empyrean god Eastlung cursed in his heart. He didn't expect that the Celestial Darch would be able to control a portion of the energy while controlling such a massive amount of power. He was still using his spikes to open a path. The extremely condensed silver-white energy pierced through his chest at an extremely fast speed, causing blood to spurt out like a blossoming flower. The Celestial Darch looked at the Empyrean god before him coldly. His extended fingers curled into 5. Who gave you the courage to face me head-on? Crackle! Crackle! Countless amounts of energy gathered, forming into many silver-white spears that shot out. Empyrean god Eastlung didn't even have time to dodge. The spears tore through his protective heavenly god power and pierced through his body, leaving ghastly bloody holes in his head, neck, limbs, chest, abdomen. Not a single part of his body was spared. Eastlung. The heavenly space god finally panicked when he saw this. Even the heavenly karma god and the eternal god couldn't help but suck in a sharp breath. Looks of disbelief appeared on their faces. He unleashed a full-screen skill and a powerful sure-kill skill. Wasn't this too much? Empyrean god Eastlung was bleeding profusely. He began to loosen his grip on his spikes. The green spikes fell to the ground, and his body also fell powerlessly. The boundless power of the heavens devoured and destroyed him. One down. The Celestial Darch turned to look at the other 2 Empyrean gods. Empyrean god Black Mist was still hiding in her golden turtle shell. The turtle shell was made of some unknown material, but it was extremely durable. It still looked indestructible. However, she didn't dare to show her face. The heavenly space god glared at the Celestial Darch with an enraged expression. The Celestial Darch smiled at the heavenly space god. I love dealing with tough opponents. It's your turn now. He took a step forward, and a huge amount of energy surged toward him. It was as if the Celestial Darch had brought with him the power of the entire world. The heavenly space god felt the pressure on him increase drastically. The most powerful spatial barrier constructed by the heavenly gods began to crack open at a rate discernible to the naked eye. What a powerful pressure! The heavenly space god felt like death was looming over his entire body. The closer the celestial Dharch got to him, the stronger this feeling became. There was no way out. A determined expression appeared on the heavenly space god's face. He spread open his arms, and an unprecedented light erupted from the divine halo above his head. Cracks began to appear on the divine halo. Heavenly God technique, infinite divine space. Crack, crack, crack. Layers of space appeared around the celestial Dharch. Each layer of space was imbued with divine power, and they were countless times more powerful than normal spatial barriers. They stacked on top of one another to form the most powerful and sturdy barrier in this world. The celestial Dharch crashed headfirst into the space before him, and after summoning the surging energy of heaven and earth to violently shatter several layers of space, his speed was hampered, and he became slower and slower. Not only that, but every time he crashed through space, the spatial shards would transform into the sharpest blades that sliced into his body, tearing his sleeves and inflicting a series of wounds on his skin. Oh, the space of this world is only one layer. The inner layer is where all things in this world reside, while the outer layer is boundless chaos. You're using your heavenly God power to create countless layers of space in this world. Interesting. The celestial Dharch continued to make his way toward the heavenly space god as energy roared and space crumbled. His speed had slowed, but his unstoppable aura did not diminish in the slightest. Infinite divine space? I want to see if space is as infinite as you make it out to be. Boom, boom, boom. One spatial barrier after another continued to shatter. There really did seem to be countless layers of space, but the celestial Thearka's power also seemed to be limitless. The heavenly space god's divine halo was cracking open from overexertion, and cold sweat began to pour down his forehead upon seeing this. He looked at the celestial Dharch making his way toward him, and an indescribable sense of fear welled up in his heart. Was this man really invincible? Chapter 2083. The heavenly space god had already been destroyed countless times by the celestial Dharch. At this moment, the celestial Thearka's imperial robe was torn, and he was drenched in blood. He looked extremely wretched. However, the heavenly space god knew that it was the one who was in an even more sorry state. The infinite god space was indeed infinite. However, he who maintained the unlimited divine space did not have unlimited power. The heavenly space god was only able to unleash this spell technique by overexerting its own power of the heavenly gods. In the face of this top-notch heavenly god technique, not only was the celestial Dharch not controlled by the power of the infinite divine space, but he was even advancing toward him step by step. This forced the heavenly space god to increase the power of his spell technique. Ka ka ka! The cracks on the divine ring were still spreading. The celestial emperor's footsteps did not stop. Heavenly god Black Mist rolled his turtle shell over to save the situation, but the celestial Dharch casually slapped him. Boundless power of heaven surged explosively, smashing onto the turtle shell and sending it flying. The heavenly space god's heavenly god technique was being broken through while maintaining a large-scale attack, and this made the heavenly space god even more nervous. The celestial Dharch was still approaching step by step. The heavenly space god gritted its teeth and held on with all its might. One spatial barrier after another was shattered by the terrifying energy. The Sky Emperor's blood-stained face, which had a faint smile on it, was getting closer and closer to him, like a god of death who was about to reap his life, dragging him step by step into the darkness of destruction. This was the first time the heavenly space god had experienced something like this. However, he was not overly flustered. Maintaining the infinite divine space required extreme power. Could it be that the Sky Emperor did not need to pay any price to maintain such a state? It was impossible for the celestial arch to last forever. Now, it was just a competition to see who could last the longest. The heavenly space god was confident that she would be the one to last until the end. Infinite divine space. The celestial arch gripped the air and slowly pulled out a dazzling, celestial sword from the spatial rift. Boundless power of the heavens and energy began to converge upon the blade of the sword in a frenzy. The heavenly space god's eyes widened. What was going on? Why didn't it continue smashing space? What was he trying to do by pulling out a sword? Did he want to? Impossible. Although they were only a few dozen meters apart, there was still an infinite distance between them. That was a spatial barrier that represented countless layers of divine power stacked on top of each other. This level of power could only be exhausted, not forcefully broken. Hua! The heavenly sword surged with countless streaks of light and crashed down with boundless energy. At this moment, the world turned black and white. Only the sword emitted an extremely dazzling light. It was extremely beautiful and ferocious. Layers of space shattered like countless firecrackers exploding. The heavenly space god's countless layers of space were sliced in half at an incredible speed. Regardless of how many layers of space there were, all of them were shattered at almost the same rate. Rip! The blade slashed down, and the dazzling blade light pierced through the sky. The black-haired handsome man standing in the sky widened his eyes as he stared blankly at Infinite Shin Kong, who had been cut into two. Lines of blood appeared on his body, extending from his head to his feet. Finally, under the shocked gazes of countless people, Infinite Shin Kong became two smooth cuts and fell to the ground. You're nothing more than this. The celestial arch slowly sheathed his sword. When the coalition army of the 9 states saw their emperor's awe-inspiring majesty and imposing aura, and not a single heavenly god could stop him, they couldn't help but cheer loudly. The celestial arch was just as bad *SS and reliable as ever. He was able to suppress a total of 3 heavenly gods on his own. As expected of the former number 1 cultivator in the kingdom of the 9 states, he was extremely powerful. Boom! The 2 halves of the heavenly space god's body crashed to the ground and dissipated into countless specks of light. However, those specks of light soon converged again to form a tall and handsome man in a fluttering divine robe. It was none other than the heavenly space god who had been sliced in half. The heavenly space god appeared to be completely unscathed, but the cracks on his divine halo had already reached an extremely ridiculous level. There were tens of thousands of black cracks all over his divine halo, like a sinister spiderweb. Hee, there's still one more strike. The celestial arch wasn't all that surprised by the heavenly god's undying nature. Instead, he drew his dazzling heavenly sword again, and boundless power of the heavens and free energy converged on the blade of the sword again. The heavenly space god's teeth chattered involuntarily upon seeing this. Again, he could use such a terrifying technique a second time. Wulan, the heavenly space god, yelled into the distance. He was going to call for reinforcements. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The golden turtle shell revolved as it tore through the vast power of the heavens before crashing toward the celestial arch. The celestial arch raised a palm and slapped the golden turtle shell, flying again. He couldn't even be bothered to look at it. The heavenly space god was so worked up that he wanted to curse at the sight of the heavenly mist god. Could he be any more of a ** king mediator than this? Accept your fate. No one can save you now. The celestial arch raised his heavenly sword high into the air. The heavenly space god wanted to escape, but he discovered that all of the powers of heaven and earth were binding him, making him fall into an indescribable and inescapable trap. Was he really going to die? The heavenly space god was struck by an indescribable sense of exasperation and remorse as he looked at the insanely mighty man. He had thought that this was going to be a brutal gang battle where they would kill the Celestial Darch and crush the morale of the entire kingdom of the 9 States United Army. Who would have thought that the tables would be turned? The 3 of them would be the ones being pummeled by the Celestial Darch? However, right at this moment, heaven and earth suddenly became as dark as ink. Even the light of spell techniques, as well as the light of the stars and the moon, was completely obscured by this darkness. A figure with 9 divine halos revolving around his body and a black feather robe appeared before everyone's eyes. He held a dark, long sword in his hand, upon which 9 peculiar stars shone. The owner of this figure was none other than Heavenly God Donglong, who had been beaten to a pulp. The celestial Thearka's expression finally became grave upon seeing Heavenly God Donglong. 9 divine halos! I haven't even decided to kill you yet, but you've already chosen to commit suicide? Once a divine, heaven-stage, heavenly human activated their 9 divine halos, they would obtain unimaginably terrifying power. However, this power came at a price, and that was death. Heavenly God Donglong cracked a smile upon hearing the celestial Thearka's words. As long as I can kill you, the enemy who defiles the heavens, it's all worth it. Darkness surged violently. The heavenly power and free energy around the celestial Darch was being devoured by a massive, invisible mouth. Heavenly God Donglong raised his sword of darkness, which was formed from the power of his 9 divine halos. Heavenly God technique, sort of the end of heaven and earth, origin darkness. Heavenly God Donglong charged toward the celestial Darch and slashed down with his sword. The celestial Darch also wielded his heavenly sword and slashed toward Heavenly God Donglong. A blinding light burst forth from the blade of his sword. This was the power of the heavens. This was the absolute power of all the energies on the battlefield. Boom! The 2 energies collided. An extremely terrifying amount of energy exploded forth. The sword of the end of heaven and earth possessed the laws of darkness. Regardless of whether it was the earth, the starry sky, the moonlight, the power of the heavens, vital energy, particles, energy, space, Tao, everything would be devoured into nothingness by it. Not only that, but the slicing power, gravity power, karma power, and death power within the sword also increased its power to a whole new level. The celestial Thearka's sword was not weak either. This was a technique that could almost insta-kill the heavenly space god. However, as soon as the collision began, the celestial Darch sensed that his heavenly sword was rapidly being devoured. The power of darkness was too powerful. Even if he activated his full power, he would not be able to withstand it. Break through! The divine patterns on the celestial Thearka's body lit up, and he let loose an enraged roar as he pressed his heavenly sword downward. The pure white energy exploded with a loud rumble, faintly suppressing the darkness. However, the darkness was like a bottomless abyss, and it would never disappear unless it devoured everything before it. Gale force winds swept through the air as destructive power wreaked havoc. The space within a radius of over 500 kilometers became a slaughterhouse for the celestial Darch and heavenly God Donglong swords. Even the nearby heavenly space god was blasted flying by their clash. The heavenly space god, who was already on the brink of death, was almost killed by the shockwaves from the explosion. A large number of Kingdom of the 9 States United Army and Heavenly Human Tribe United Army were also caught up in this battle. Some of them threw up blood as they flew through the air, while others fell to the ground. However, none of them were cursing or swearing. Instead, all of them were watching the battle unfold in the distance with unease and anxiety. They wanted to know the result. The clash between the 2 powers lasted for over a dozen seconds before dissipating. However, it was as if no victor had been determined between the 2 powers, and they both disappeared at the same time. At the same time, 2 figures appeared in the air. Chapter 2084. The darkness dissipated. Dazzling starlight and bright moonlight once again sprinkled on the earth. The Sky Emperor was still clad in a tattered imperial robe as he stood proudly high up in the sky. However, one of his sleeves was empty. His sword-wielding right arm, as well as a small part of his body, had disappeared without a trace. When the soldiers of the Kingdom of the 9 States Coalition Army saw the Sky Emperor in this state, their hearts skipped a beat. The Celestial Arch was the strongest person on this battlefield. If he were to suffer any serious damage, it would have a major impact on the situation of the entire battlefield. The current situation was clearly not optimistic. By contrast, Empyrean god Eastlong, who was in front of the Celestial Emperor, didn't seem to have any visible wounds on his body. Could it be that the Sky Emperor had lost this battle? It wasn't impossible. Back then, the Heaven Disciple candidate Dark Thunder Emperor had been insta-killed by a heavenly god sword after his 9th divine ring had exploded. It would be very normal for a celestial emperor to be defeated by this sword. When they thought of this possibility, a strand of sorrow unconsciously surged out from their hearts. If even the Celestial Arch lost, who else on the battlefield would be able to stop these heavenly gods? However, before the crowd could grieve, a crisp sound began to spread throughout the battlefield. Ka, ka, ka! The divine halo around Empyrean god Donglong's body began to crack apart one after another. Then it transformed into specks of light and dissipated. Countless tiny cracks began to appear all over his body. It was as if an exquisite porcelain had fallen to the ground and broken into pieces before being glued back together. I actually lost? Empyrean god Donglong spoke with great difficulty. His eyes were wide open as he stared at the disheveled man in front of him in both disbelief and shock. The Celestial Arch swallowed a regenerative divine pill in an unhurried manner and changed into a brand new set of imperial robes before speaking in a calm and authoritative voice. "It's a worthy death to be able to die by my hands." Empyrean god East Dragon. The young man was furious and was about to spit out some words. At this moment, the Celestial Arch had already gently waved his sleeve, as if he were trying to detect an annoying fly. Empyrean god Donglong's body, which was already covered in cracks, seemed to have suffered a heavy blow. With a bang, it was reduced to dust and particles of light that dissipated into the world. The world fell silent. Almost all living beings couldn't help but look at the figure in the sky. The situation had changed too quickly. 1 minute ago, they thought that the Celestial Arch was done for. In the next minute, Celestial God Donglong was smashed into dust by the Celestial Arch with a wave of his sleeve. A mighty heavenly god had fallen just like that. "Heavenly God Donglong!" the heavenly space god roared, his face filled with rage. The worst situation happened. Heavenly deities actually fell among them, and it was even under what they thought was a great advantage. The heavenly space god glowered at the man in the imperial robe with rage. Under the effects of the divine pill, his body and severed arm began to regenerate at a rate discernible to the naked eye, and he was back to normal in just a few seconds. The Celestial Arch also turned toward the heavenly space god, and his invisible aura made the heavenly space god's heart tremble. The heavenly space god thought back to the celestial Thearchus' sword strike, and it couldn't help but panic. Is this man a monster? How could a Tao integration stage super mighty figure unleash such power? The Celestial Arch took a slow step toward the heavenly space god, and a faint smile appeared on the heavenly space god's face. "No one can stop me now, right?" The heavenly space god wanted to escape. No, this was a temporary tactical retreat. However, right at this moment, a turtle shell suddenly spun toward the Celestial Arch at a speed so fast that it seemed to be tearing through the sky. The Celestial Arch came to his senses and was just about to raise his sword to defend himself when a series of golden chains shot forth from the hole in the turtle shell, entangling the celestial Thearchus' sword blade and keeping him at bay. Bam! An earth-shattering boom erupted, accompanied by the sound of bones cracking. The golden turtle shell crashed heavily into the celestial Thearchus' chest, causing his chest to cave in and his back to bulge. PFFF. The celestial Thearcha's eyes widened, and he threw up a mouthful of blood as his body flew through the air like a cannonball. A young woman poked her beautiful head out from the turtle's shell, and a sharp light flashed through her dead fish eyes. Demonic illusion turtle attack. Spin. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The turtle shell spun rapidly again before transforming into a streak of golden light that hurtled toward the celestial Tharch. Die! The celestial Tharch let loose an enraged roar as he sliced through the golden chains with his sword blade before slashing toward the oncoming streak of golden light. A resounding boom erupted as the turtle shell was sent flying, and cracks had even appeared on its surface. However, the celestial Tharch was also forced into retreat by the recoil. Before the numbness in his hand had even subsided, the golden turtle shell had already spun around in midair before crashing toward him again. Not only that, but a golden chain also shot forth like lightning. Again, the celestial Tharch was enraged. Was this woman looking down on him? He was already prepared for this, and he sliced through the golden chain with his sword in this dire situation. However, the golden turtle shell was already upon him at this moment. The celestial Tharch couldn't use his sword, so he could only use his fists. Bam! Terrifying shock waves erupted forth. The celestial Thearcha's fist collided with the golden turtle shell, but he felt as if he had struck something extremely hard, and his body was knocked flying again. The golden turtle shell did not relent and continued to spin toward the celestial Tharch. Boom, boom, boom! A series of terrifying shock waves erupted in the sky. The celestial Tharch was forced into retreat by the golden turtle shell, and he was at an absolute disadvantage. The heavenly space god was dumbstruck. When did heavenly mist god become so powerful? No. The heavenly space god discovered that something was amiss. It wasn't that heavenly mist god had become more powerful. It was that the celestial Tharch had become weaker. Regardless of whether it was his control over the power of the heavens or the energy in the outside world, none of them were as powerful as before. That made sense. The celestial Tharch had already unleashed such a terrifying attack twice, so there was no way he could still maintain his peak condition. He had most likely said that he was going to cut him down with his sword just to scare him away. A sense of humiliation welled up in the heavenly space god's heart as he recalled how he had almost decided to run away. Celestial Tharch, your end is here! The heavenly space god yelled as his body flashed through the air and entered the fray. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of the celestial Tharch. He grabbed the space with one hand, and a spatial blade in the shape of a black thunderbolt emerged from the rift. As the blade streaked through the space, it ignored all resistance and slashed toward the celestial Thearcha's chest. Dark lightning spatial projection. Whoosh! The spatial saber tore through the celestial Thearcha's clothes, inflicting a ghastly wound upon his body from which blood gushed forth. Are you really not afraid of death? The celestial Thearcha's aura soared explosively as he slashed his sword toward the heavenly space god. The heavenly space god glowered at the celestial Tharch. Freeze! Crack! The space around him was instantly sealed, and the celestial Thearcha's movements faltered for an instant. The heavenly space god's black lightning spatial saber continued to slash downward, leaving countless dark shadows in its wake. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh! A series of crimson saber wounds appeared on the celestial Thearcha's body. Hee, are you trying to scare me, celestial Tharch? You're going to die today. The heavenly space god was struck by a sense of elation, and he took this opportunity to unleash a merciless slash. The celestial Thearcha's body was extremely powerful, and even the heavenly space god was unable to slice him in half. However, that didn't matter. After all, this method of slicing him to pieces was very much to his liking. Boom! The celestial Tharch struggled free from the spatial seal, and he raised his sword in an enraged manner to slash down upon the heavenly space god. At this moment, the golden turtle shell spiraled toward the celestial darch like a streak of destructive light before crashing into the celestial Thearcha's waist, causing his body to bend in half. Boom! There was another explosive roar. The celestial darch fell to the ground with blood gushing from his mouth. Celestial darch, you've reached the end of your road. Two valiant and terrifying figures looked down at the man on the ground who was riddled with scars. Accept the judgment of the heavenly gods. Chapter 2085. The celestial darch struggled to his feet. However, the heavenly space god pinned the celestial darch to the ground with a palm. Celestial darch, what's the point of struggling now? The heavenly space god sneered. The celestial darch chortled with glee. I have no choice but to struggle. I'm the celestial darch, and I have to kill at least 3 of you heavenly gods. The heavenly space god's face convulsed. CK. How could he still be so cocky at a time like this? Celestial darch. Wah. Celestial darch. The tables had turned far too quickly. The celestial darch had thought that he would be able to subdue all of the heavenly gods. But after killing one heavenly god, he was forced into a corner due to exhaustion. Who could stop the remaining 2 heavenly gods now? Divine patterns erupted from the celestial Thearcha's body, and countless cracks began to appear on the sealed space before it began to twist and shatter. His body slowly rose to his feet with difficulty. Humph, you overestimate yourself. The heavenly space god didn't think that the severely wounded celestial darch would still have enough energy to struggle free from his spatial seal, and his expression darkened even further. Stop wasting time, let's attack together. A young woman poked her head out from within the golden turtle shell. I have a feeling that if we don't kill him now, something else is going to happen. The heavenly space god immediately nodded upon hearing this. Heavenly mist goddess Wu Lan's sensory abilities were extremely powerful, so the heavenly space god didn't doubt her words. I'm going to end you with this technique. The heavenly space god brought his palms together before separating them, and a semi-transparent silver blade appeared in midair before pointing its tip toward the celestial Thearcha's head. As soon as it appeared, the space in the entire world trembled lightly, and it automatically released a shapeless and mighty force onto the sharp blade, allowing it to possess the absolute power to cut through everything. Heavenly God technique, boundless falling void. Ripples appeared in the air. The space between the blade and the celestial darch was sliced in half by the blade, revealing the chaotic darkness within, as if a black rift had suddenly appeared between heaven and earth. The celestial darch knew that if he were to unleash this technique, he would most likely die. He didn't want to die yet. How could he fall before he saw the victory of the 9 states and the victory of the human race with his own eyes? Even if he had to die, he had to drag these 3 heavenly gods down with him. Otherwise, what would happen to the Eastern Front? The celestial darch stood up and raised the sword in his hand as his aura surged into the clouds. The storm rose again. It was majestic. He's clearly going to die, so why is he standing up? The heavenly space god knew that no matter how much the celestial darch struggled, he wouldn't be able to defend himself. Who are you standing for? The celestial darch smiled. His blood-stained face shone brightly as he said, This celestial darch stands for all of my comrades who fought alongside me, for all of the trillions of living beings on this continent. So what if it's the heavens? They've never made me fear them, and they've never made me yield. The celestial Thearcha's voice reverberated throughout the entire battlefield, causing the eyes of countless cultivators to redden as they fought even harder. The heavenly space god knew that she couldn't allow Enlin to say anything more, and she immediately activated the mercury-like blade before her. Rumble. At this moment, countless lightning bolts suddenly swam in the sky. The extremely dazzling lightning lit up the night sky as if it were day. Who dares to harm the emperor of the celestial court? A tall and broad man wearing a suit of 5 elements divine armor and a pair of golden phoenix immortal boots emerged from the sea of lightning as his voice reverberated through the heavens. Everyone was shocked by this extravagant entrance. Soon, some of the cultivators of the celestial court identified this man. He's the former war god of the celestial court, true Lord Erlang. It's Erlang Shen. My god, he's come out of seclusion? He successfully progressed to the Tao integration stage. This is great. Countless people on the battlefield began to cheer with excitement. The man who had just emerged was none other than Erlang Shen, Yang Jian, who had successfully progressed to the Tao integration stage after a long period of seclusion. The celestial Darch was a little dazed, but even in the face of such dire straits, a smile still appeared on his face. He did it. Our celestial court finally has another Tao integration stage, super mighty figure. The heavenly space god faltered initially before a disdainful expression appeared on her face. This was only a rookie Tao integration stage, super mighty figure. Yet he dared to act so arrogantly toward a heavenly god? Was he brave, or was he overestimating himself? She ignored him and was just about to unleash one final attack toward the celestial Darch. At this moment, a burst of flames that had been unleashed to the extreme by the combination of 3 different elements of essence, energy, and spirit surged toward the heavenly space god with unstoppable force. Boom! The flames exploded on the heavenly space god's body to form a bright red sky, scorching flaming lotus. Heaven-crushing technique. True Samadhi flaming lotus. Yang Jian knew that his opponent was not to be underestimated, so he unleashed his most powerful technique from the get-go. The red flaming lotus materialized from the true Samadhi. Flames began to explode and expand relentlessly, as if it were going to incinerate and purify all things. However, a tearing sound suddenly erupted. A silvery white blade projection tore the massive red flaming lotus in half down the middle before crashing down toward the celestial Thearka's head like a shooting star. The heavenly space god completely ignored Yang Jian's attack and focused solely on attacking the celestial Darch. The celestial Darch slashed his celestial sword toward the sky, sending sword intent surging through the heavens. Boom! The clash between the two shattered the space within a radius of several hundred kilometers. The moment the silver-white blade light fell on the ground, the extreme sharpness of the blade light cut the ground into 2 halves. A bottomless crack appeared in the middle, extending to the end of the crack. Erlang Shen's flesh crawled as he sensed the power of this attack, and his entire body trembled uncontrollably. If this attack had landed on his body, even 10 Erlang Shen wouldn't have been able to withstand it. Is he dead? The heavenly space god panted heavily as more and more cracks appeared on the divine halo above his head. His aura was extremely feeble, but an expression of elation appeared on his face. The dust cloud dissipated. A figure with fluttering robes stood proudly in the middle of the cracked ground. The Sky Emperor had his hands clasped behind his back, and there was a deep wound on his chest that revealed his bones, but it did not affect his proud and unyielding posture in the slightest. He looked up at Yang Jian and said with a smile, "Thank you." Yang Jian was a little confused. He didn't seem to have helped much, did he? Why would the celestial Darch thank him? Was he thanking him for buying some time for the Sky Emperor? How could this be? How could he have blocked my limitless falling void? The heavenly space god was in disbelief. So be it. You can block it once, but you can't block it a second time. The current Sky Emperor is just struggling on his deathbed. The only difference is that he will die a little later. No one can stop us from killing the Celestial Emperor, Black Mist said calmly. She knew that the heavenly space god had also run out of energy, but she, the Black Mist goddess, was in peak condition, so killing a celestial Darch on the brink of death was a piece of cake for her. No one can stop him. What if I join? A cold and heavenly voice suddenly appeared in the night sky. Chapter 2086. That cold yet gentle voice spread throughout the entire battlefield like water. Her voice was like a heavenly melody to the ears, and it was extremely different from the sounds of battle on the battlefield. Yet it seemed to have blended perfectly into the battlefield. No one knew where the voice was coming from. They looked up to find a vast expanse of stars and a bright moon hanging high in the sky. "Who is it?" The heavenly space god looked up into the sky with an even more grave expression than when Erling Shin had first appeared. The pristine white moonlight cleansed the entire sky. In the clear night sky, on that perfect full moon, a figure slowly appeared. The fragrance of osmanthus wafted through the air for over 1,500 kilometers. All of the living beings were struck by an indescribable sense of comfort. A woman so beautiful that she could make all living things fall for her walked over under the moonlight. Her exquisite, snow-white feet lightly tapped on the void, and her dreamlike, colorful immortal dress was like the rosy clouds in the night sky, moving the stars and pulling the moon. She slowly opened her clear, gentle eyes, from which rippled like rippling water. "My name is Chang-yi." Her voice was gentle and pleasant to the ears, making all living beings feel as if they had been plunged into a land of warmth and tenderness. "Celestial maiden Chang-yi. My god, is she Chang-yi?" "She's breathtakingly beautiful." All of the cultivators of the Kingdom of the 9 States let loose cries of surprise. Most of them had never seen Chang-yi's true appearance before, and all of them were completely entranced by Chang-yi's beauty. Even the immortals of the celestial court who had seen Chang-yi before were astonished. Chang-yi was already known as the #1 beauty of the Kingdom of the 9 States, and she was even more beautiful than before. Her skin was as fair and translucent as the moon, and her features were breathtaking. Not only was she elegant and ethereal, but she was also exuding an aura of eternal immortality. Chang-yi also successfully transcended her tribulation. "That's great. I was worried that she would be defeated by another moon. Our celestial court and the Kingdom of the 9 States are glorious." This was a battle that affected the entire Tai Chu continent. Countless powerful cultivators would fall like shooting stars, but there would also be countless new cultivators rising to the stage like dazzling stars. Erling Shin and Chang-yi's successful tribulation transcendence was like the birth of a supernova. Countless cultivators on the battlefield were excited and elated. The addition of 2 Tao integration stage super mighty figures would undoubtedly be a great boost to this battle. However, there were also many cultivators who were concerned. But Chang-yi has only just transcended her tribulation, so she shouldn't be able to fight a heavenly god. Can she win? How could she possibly win? Heavenly gods are invincible beings below the god of creation stage. Chang-yi is a new Tao integration stage super mighty figure, and she's not the heaven-crushing sex heavenly disciple. How could she possibly battle a heavenly god? Some of the cultivators did not lose their minds. Upon seeing the scene before them, the excitement they felt from Chang-yi's appearance was quickly extinguished by the cruel reality before them. He was only a rookie Tao integration stage mighty figure. No matter how powerful he was, he could only thrash heaven pioneer stage great generals. It was still difficult for them to intervene in a battle between divine heaven stage mighty figures. Erling Shin had tried to interrupt the heavenly space god's attack, but he had failed. The heavenly space god couldn't even be bothered to respond to him as he charged toward the celestial arch. "You're a heavenly god, yet you're trying to bully me with numbers. Let me be your opponent." A rare battle intent appeared on Chang-yi's face as she looked at the heavenly space god. The heavenly space god came to his senses and couldn't help but sneer. "You finally succeeded in your Tao integration stage, yet you're trying to commit suicide so soon? If you want to become the shortest Tao integration stage super mighty figure in history, then I'll fulfill your wish." He shot a meaningful glance at Heavenly God Black Mist as he spoke. Heavenly God Black Mist immediately turned toward the celestial arch. The celestial arch was already extremely feeble, but so was the heavenly space god. Didn't he see how badly his divine halo had been shattered? If the heavenly space god continued to attack the celestial arch, he might be forced to sacrifice his life for him. However, he couldn't back down now. After all, he had already said so many harsh words. If he backed down now, then his authority as a heavenly god would be completely tarnished. Now that Chang'e had stepped forward, the situation had instantly changed. Wasn't Chang'e provoking him? Wasn't she asking for a duel? This was a great opportunity. This gave the heavenly space god a way out. The heavenly space god could battle Chang'e in a justifiable manner before handing the celestial arch over to heavenly black mist god. That way he could torture Chang'e, and heavenly black mist god would torture the celestial arch. Not only would the heavenly god's dignity be preserved, but they would also be able to suppress their enemies. Even though the heavenly space god was currently quite feeble, he could still crush a rookie Dao integration stage super mighty figure with ease. Don't underestimate the power of a heavenly god. The heavenly space god raised its head to look at Chang'e, and countless transparent spatial fragments began to appear around its body in the shape of tornadoes. They were like countless shards of glass that refracted light, except they were countless times sharper and harder than glass, and they could easily slice through a Dao integration stage super mighty figure's body. A monstrous aura erupted forth. This was the aura of a heavenly god, a paramount aura. Chang'e's body fell from the sky upon seeing the heavenly space god, who was preparing to attack, and she descended from the sky like a peerlessly beautiful rainbow waterfall. She had also chosen to attack. Spatial storm. The heavenly space god waved a hand toward Chang'e. Countless spatial fragments created a tornado that was powerful enough to slice through all things before hurtling toward the woman in the sky. The heavenly space god was confident that this attack alone would be able to slice his opponent into the tiniest particles. Great mystic water. Chang'e let loose a light cry, and the purest moonlight suddenly descended from the full moon in the sky, which enveloped the woman's tall and slender body, as if a thin, white membrane had appeared over her body. The woman then crashed into the spatial tornado without taking evasive measures. Rumble! The violent spatial blades engulfed that beautiful figure. The absolute power of space sliced through the woman's body in a frenzy. The heavenly space god chuckled. You sure don't know your place. You dare to force your way through my heavenly god powers? Do you really think you're the heaven-crushing sex heavenly disciple? However, in the next instant, his smile congealed on his face. The white, moon-like light tore through the spatial tornado. A colorful dress that resembled clouds and mist danced wildly in the air. The woman had already appeared before the heavenly space god, and a mesmerizing smile blossomed on her exquisitely beautiful face. Under the moonlight, she turned to the side and swept a leg through the air, revealing her well-proportioned calf. Her leg was as fair as the moon under the moonlight, but it was imbued with indescribable sharpness and power as it crashed into the heavenly space god's lower abdomen. Bam! The power of the moon tore through the heavenly space god's spatial barrier before exploding with devastating force. The heavenly space god's body was bent into the shape of a bow. The heavenly space god's eyes widened with incredulity as he threw up another mouthful of blood. He was unable to say anything as he was sent flying through the air. All of the living beings stared at the scenes unfolding before their eyes with wide eyes. In that instant, Chang'e's appearance was so holy and inviolable. She was so proud and aloof. Chapter 2087. How could this be? How could a rookie Dao integration stage, super mighty figure be able to break through my spatial power? The heavenly space god stared at the woman in the distance, with astonishment etched on its face. Space, heavenly god Black Mist, was just about to attack the celestial arch when he saw what had happened to the heavenly space god. He immediately became nervous and wanted to turn around to help the heavenly space god. Don't worry about me. I can handle this, the heavenly space god yelled at heavenly black mist god. It was far too humiliating to be sent flying by a rookie Tao integration stage super mighty figure. He had to get back at her. She's just a rookie Tao integration stage super mighty figure. I must have been too careless just then, and she must have used some kind of mystic technique. The heavenly space god forced herself to calm down. At this time, Chang'e was already flying toward him again. The heavenly space god's expression was extremely grave, and she almost instantly came up with a countermeasure. The spatial storm he had unleashed earlier was a wide-area attack that would save him a lot of trouble. It was aimed at normal Tao integration stage super mighty figures, and Chang'e was more powerful than normal Tao integration stage super mighty figures, so she was able to evade it by a fluke. This time he was going to simplify and focus all of his attacks on a single point. That way he would be able to break through Chang'e's defenses with a high-density power of the heavenly gods. A purple spatial blade projection began to appear on the heavenly space god's right hand. The space within a radius of 100 miles resonated with the blade light. Not only did it add an invisible force to the blade light, but it also facilitated the attack of the spatial blade light. He come at me. A cruel smile appeared on the heavenly space god's face as she looked at Chang'e, who was maintaining her great arcane water barrier. His right hand was an extremely sharp spatial blade. Even if it was a celestial emperor, he was confident that he could cut him in half, let alone Chang'e. When a lion hunts a rabbit, it uses all its strength. He decided to use this move to kill Chang'e. The heavenly space god raised her right hand, and her spatial saber glowed with a dazzling light. So what if your defense is amazing? I can do it with one slash, whoosh! The woman in front of him suddenly disappeared into thin air. Heavenly space god. All of a sudden, Chang'e appeared behind the heavenly space god. The immortal robe was like the clouds of the night, and the curved blade was like the fangs of the frosty night. Wherever there was moonlight, it was Chang'e's domain. She could come and go as she pleased. A crescent scimitar had appeared in the woman's hand, and it was as if she were really holding the moon in her hand. The pure and eternal, paramount power of the moon erupted forth, striking a bone-chilling chill into the heavenly space god's heart. You seem to have some kind of misunderstanding regarding the existence of the essence of heaven and earth. Chang'e smiled faintly, and the crescent moon scimitar in her hand fell at an extremely terrifying speed. The heavenly space god tried to defend itself, only to find that its speed couldn't keep up with Chang'e's attack. It couldn't be helped, it was too sudden. He didn't expect Chang'e to have such a mysterious power, and he was too weak and exhausted. The moon-white blade radiance pierced through the sky, as if there was another dazzling and holy crescent moon in the night sky. Whoosh! Fresh blood flew everywhere. A ghastly wound had been inflicted on the heavenly space god's back. The divine halo above its head was also trembling uncontrollably, as if it could explode at any moment. The heavenly space god let loose an explosive roar before swinging an arm toward Chang'e with lightning speed. Chang'e wanted to defend herself, but the area of effect of this attack was simply too large. Bam! The entire space began to warp and tremor. Chang'e was blasted flying by a burst of powerful spatial power, and a trickle of blood trickled down the corner of her lips. She had initially wanted to use the power of the moon to teleport, but she discovered that the space around her had been completely sealed off by the heavenly space god's attack. A heavenly god was a heavenly god after all, and they could unleash unimaginable power with just a wave of their hand. However, in the face of a heavenly god in this state, a cold light flashed through Chang'e's eyes. She could win. All of a sudden, countless dark blue swords appeared behind Chang'e, like a peacock spreading its feathers, each of which exuded an unimaginable frosty intent and sharpness. The heavenly space god had initially wanted to take advantage of the moment it had blasted Chang'e, flying to open up some distance between them, only to discover that at the same time, silky white moonlight had suddenly enshrouded his surroundings. The moonlight appeared to be extremely beautiful, but it was also imbued with extremely terrifying killing intent, and the frosty power it released had already sealed the space around it in ice. Great Heavenly Slaughter Formation. Chong stopped herself from flying backward before waving a sleeve through the air. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A large number of dark blue swords shot forth from behind her with monstrous killing intent, leaving a series of trajectories in their wake that threatened to slice the heavens in half. You're able to unleash such a terrifying counterattack so quickly? The heavenly space god's expression shifted again, and it tried to forcibly tear open the great Heavenly Slaughter Formation, only to find that this formation was even more sturdy than it had imagined. It was not something that could be broken in a second or two. At this moment, the flying swords were already upon it with monstrous killing intent. The heavenly space god slashed its spatial blade toward the oncoming flying swords. Bam, bam, bam. Each and every one of its attacks was able to pulverize the dark blue flying swords, and the terrifying power of extreme imbued within the flying swords also forced him back in retreat. At this moment, Chang was already standing on the spot, chanting a mantra in a low voice. A full moon divine seal appeared on her forehead, resonating with the bright moon in the sky, as if she were guiding something. Heaven and earth seemed to have fallen a little more silent. However, an astonishing storm was brewing behind this silence. The heavenly space god sensed that something was amiss, and it was trying to think of a way to break out of the encirclement. In the name of the moon, Chang stood in the air with her hands made seals, and her eyes were tightly shut, as if she were doing something with an earnest and pious expression. Her immortal dress danced lightly under the moonlight, and it was as if she were painting a picture of eternal beauty. Descend, moon's final judgment, crimson moon. The sky suddenly dimmed, when the moon and stars reappeared. A red full moon suddenly appeared in the sky, obscuring half of the sky and violently crashing through the clouds like a boundless crimson continent before crashing down toward the heavenly space god with boundless might and pressure. The heavenly space god was a little dazed as he looked up at the falling moon. The Kingdom of the 9 States United Army and the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army that were still fighting on the battlefield couldn't help but look up at the terrifying crimson moon with dumbfounded expressions. What spell technique is this? What a huge moon! Are we really going to be all right if it falls just like that? Celestial Maiden Chang. He is going to destroy us as well. Some people were astonished, some people were panicking, and some people were extremely horrified. The heavenly mist god immediately flew toward the heavenly space god upon seeing the crimson moon. However, right at this moment, the celestial darch suddenly gripped his palm. Dark heaven net. A series of purplish golden lines formed the laws of heaven before appearing around the heavenly mist god. Erling Shin, who had been accumulating power for a long time, tossed out a painting imbued with countless profound images. This was none other than the divine tool, Mountain River State Painting. Countless mountains, rivers, and primordial immortal beasts appeared from the painting before crashing down upon the heavenly mist god's body with the power of an entire world. Boom! The devastating force and the purplish golden lines were able to stop the heavenly mist god in his tracks. At this moment, the gargantuan crimson moon had already descended upon the heavenly space god. Chapter 2088. A murderous aura swept toward him. Indescribable killing power and unfathomable power of frost exploded at this moment, freezing the entire space before tearing it apart. This is just a mere moon. I can even slice apart planets, let alone a mere moon. The heavenly space god let loose an explosive roar as the spatial blade in his hand expanded to over 1,000 kilometers in length, slicing a devastating black spatial rift into the air. A mere moon. Chang smiled but didn't say anything. Enormous pressure and the power of the moon had already begun to twist and warp the space around her. The heavenly space god was unable to evade, and his spatial blade crashed down upon the crimson moon. However, the scene of the crimson moon being sliced in half with ease did not materialize. A burst of eternal, undying power that only belonged to a paragon of the heavenly Tao was able to repress the power of his spatial blade. The heavenly space god was astonished. "This is the power of the heavens." Chang'e smiled. "That's right. The sun and moon revolve around each other, and I am the only moon. You can also refer to me as Heavenly Moon God." Rumble. The terrifying crimson moon imbued with boundless pressure and power made the spatial blade creak and groan. Aha! The heavenly space god resisted with all his might. He knew that if he couldn't hold on this time, he really was going to die. No one had ever been able to integrate a Tao integration stage object with an eternal symbol of heaven and earth, but Chang'e had succeeded. Furthermore, she had received the approval of the heavenly Tao, thereby officially becoming a part of the heavens. A human becoming a part of the heavens? What a joke! The heavenly space god almost cursed out loud, but this was not the time to be doing something like this. He was already facing a dire situation. He could kill Chang'e, but Chang'e also had the power to kill him. There was actually not much of a difference between the two of them. The heavenly space god was truly terrified. This was not an ordinary Tao integration stage, super mighty figure. This was AF * King, heavenly god. Cracks began to appear on the spatial blade that extended for over 1,000 kilometers. The full moon divine seal on Chang'e's forehead glowed brighter and brighter as moonlight surged for thousands of kilometers. At this moment, she was the most dazzling existence on the battlefield. I still can't use my power very well, but this blood moon is an existence that has been competing with me for over 100 years. It is the closest thing to the true moon, and it has condensed an infinite amount of Tao state and moon power. Although it's a one-time use item, giving it to you is equivalent to smashing a shattered authority onto you. Will you be able to endure it? A frosty smile suddenly appeared on Chang'e's peerlessly beautiful face. The heavenly space god was in complete despair upon hearing this. Even the celestial darch on the ground couldn't help but shiver. This Chang'e is so beautiful and looks so gentle, but it turns out that she is also a ruthless person. The girl who had fought with her for over 100 years had lost miserably. Even the last blood moon, the only proof that it had ever existed, had been snatched away by Chang'e and used as a bomb to throw at the enemy. The more beautiful a fairy was, the harder it was to provoke her. This was a blood moon that had almost become the only moon on the Taichu continent. So how could other moons compare? This was a weapon that was imbued with the power of the eternal and unique heavenly Tao. A crisp, ear-piercing crack suddenly erupted throughout heaven and earth. The spatial blade, which extended for over 1,000 kilometers, suddenly shattered into countless spatial fragments, which looked like falling red flower petals under the crimson moon. The crimson moon crashed into the heavenly space god's body with crushing force. Just the energy from the collision alone was enough to send shock waves rippling for thousands of kilometers. The extremely terrifying power of the moon tore at the heavenly space god's body in a frenzy. The power of the crimson moon was more lethal than that of normal moons, and its power of frost was more poisonous. This was Chang'e's most terrifying attack, and it was a one-time use item. Chang'e had unleashed the results of her 100-year battle with the Tao integration stage. It could be said that she had put in a lot of effort into this battle. The heavenly space god held with anguish as its body began to crack open from the impact of the crimson moon. The divine halo above its head tremored violently, and its light became dimmer and dimmer. Heavenly mist god, the heavenly karma god, and the heavenly eternal god's expressions shifted drastically upon seeing this, and they all wanted to rush over to save the heavenly space god. But they were held back by the celestial darch, black spirit snake, and the other Tao integration stage super mighty figures. No, the heavenly space god's voice of remorse and horror reverberated through the air. Finally, a blood-curdling cry erupted. An explosive sound was heard. The heavenly space god was then blasted into pieces by the crimson moon, upon which its divine halo and body both transformed into countless specks of light and rose into the sky. All of the living beings looked up into the sky with astonishment in their eyes. For some reason, they were struck by a sense of tragedy and sorrow at the sight of the heavenly space god being blasted to death by the crimson moon. The heavenly space god had fallen. It had been blasted to death by the moon summoned by Chang'e. Withdraw! Chang'e swept a sleeve through the air to withdraw the crimson moon, which was also on the verge of crumbling. Heaven and earth abruptly dimmed, immediately following which the crimson moon transformed into the purest form of moonlight before disappearing into the crescent moon in the sky and disappearing without a trace. All of the living beings heaved a collective sigh of relief. Thankfully, the moon didn't crash down. Otherwise, another wave of living beings would have been slain. After the conclusion of the battle, the Kingdom of the 9 States United Army was already revering Chang'e like a goddess. After all, she was able to summon such a massive moon at her beck and call. Progressing to the Tao integration stage was already quite a pleasant surprise. But who would have thought that she would be so bad *assess at the Tao integration stage? Her power paled in comparison even to all of the emperors aside from the celestial Dharch. Even Erlingshin, who had just successfully transcended his tribulation, was dumbstruck. Everyone had progressed to the Tao integration stage. So why was there such a massive disparity between them? She made it seem like his Tao integration stage, breakthrough, was fake. Heaven and earth fell silent again. Only a divine maiden stood silently under the moonlight with her ethereal dress fluttering in the wind. Damn it! What's wrong with this woman? Why is there another freak like her in the celestial court? The heavenly karma god gritted his teeth. You should worry about yourself instead. Black Spirit Snake slammed her massive golden sword into the heavenly karma god's face, sending chunks of fat flying through the air. Bam! The heavenly karma god let loose a blood-curdling wail as she flew back. At the same time, Ao Xiao unleashed an extremely ferocious attack on the eternal heavenly god. Her fair fists rained down upon the eternal heavenly god, and the resulting shockwaves erupted like a series of resounding booms. Even though Ao Xiao's hand had been reduced to a bloody mess, she still didn't stop attacking. The eternal heavenly god remained completely unscathed, but his expression was becoming more and more unsightly. A smile suddenly appeared on the beautiful dragon tribe woman's face as she closed her eyes. I found a way to break through your eternal defense. Chapter 2089. You can break through my eternal defense. The eternal heavenly god remained motionless, but his voice was vast and mighty. You. The stone statue's arms suddenly split into 18, each of which was wielding a peculiar weapon that exuded an eternal aura, all of which were hurtling toward Ao Xiao in a frenzy. Ao Xiao was still able to anticipate the eternal heavenly god's attacks and counter them as they came. Even if she encountered a technique that she couldn't evade, she would still be able to use her fists to break through the eternal heavenly god's attacks. Heavenly god technique, eternal puncture. The eternal heavenly god let loose an explosive roar as a crimson spear materialized in his motionless hands, which he then hurtled through the air like a bolt of crimson lightning. Ao Xiao's body spun at an extremely fast speed, and she managed to evade the spear at an extremely precise angle. The spiraling spear brushed past her slim waist and shot into the void behind her. The robe around her waist was torn apart by the aftershock of the attack, revealing the snow-white and supple skin underneath. Sparkling and translucent dragon scales faintly appeared on her skin, blocking the remaining power of the spear. She clenched her fists and was just about to launch another attack toward the eternal heavenly god. At this moment, the spear behind her suddenly changed direction and stabbed toward her back. Ao Xiaowu immediately unleashed her movement technique to evade again. However, this astonishing spear seemed to be a weapon that would never stop, and it pursued Ao Xiaowu relentlessly. Its power didn't weaken in the slightest, and it transformed into a blade of death that kept stabbing toward Ao Xiaowu. All of a sudden, Ao Xiaowu's mind was completely focused on evading. You can't break through my body, nor can you break through my eternal slaying spear. This is an eternal piercing technique that will chase after the enemy until they die. The eternal heavenly god looked at Ao Xiaowu, who was struggling to evade the spear, and a relaxed expression appeared on his face. Is this what you mean by breaking through my eternal defense? You can't even attack me right now. You want to defeat me? Dream on. I'm just daydreaming. Ao Xiaowu murmured in her sleep. The eternal spear stabbed toward Ao Xiaowu's head from behind, traveling so fast that even some Dao integration stage super mighty figures were unable to see it clearly. Ao Xiaowu tilted her head to the side in the nick of time to evade, but her neck was still sliced open by the sharp blade, and even her protective dragon scales were sliced open. Fresh blood dripped down and stained her black hair. A cold light suddenly appeared in Ao Xiaowu's eyes as she dodged, and she grabbed onto the eternal slaughter spear in the blink of an eye. The eternal, heavenly god's body faltered in fright. Boom! Before it had any time to react, Ao Xiaowu forcibly grabbed the eternal spear and stabbed it into the eternal heavenly god's body, upon which countless ancient stone fragments exploded into the air. You actually... The eternal heavenly god finally realized Ao Xiaowu's true intentions as he stared at his shattered body. She was trying to use him as a shield. Not only that, but Ao Xiaowu had also imbued the eternal slaughter spear with the power bestowed upon her by the heavenly Tao, as well as the heaven-crushing true intent that she had attained. As such, the eternal slaughter spear was even more powerful than its original eternal attribute, thereby allowing it to pierce through its defenses in one fell swoop. There was nothing that could change the state of eternity aside from eternity itself. That's right. What if a region of eternal frost encountered a state that made the region of eternal scorching heat? The two conflicted, and there was no way for them to coexist. The only way out was to substitute one type of eternity for the other, and that would determine which state was more powerful. Ao Xiaowu had imbued the eternal slaughter spear with all types of powers, and the spear was extremely lethal to begin with, so it was naturally able to pierce through the eternal heavenly god's defenses. The crimson spiral spear pierced into the heart of the divine statue, and it was still going deeper and deeper, as if it were going to puncture its entire body. You want to use my power against me? An indescribable sense of rage welled up in the eternal heavenly god's heart, and a dazzling divine light suddenly erupted from the divine halo above his head. Ao Xiaowu discovered that the eternal slaughter spear in her hand had developed an extremely powerful resistance that was preventing her from piercing any further into the eternal heavenly god's body. Ao Xiaowu was not willing to give up on this golden opportunity, and she unleashed all of her power to control the eternal slaughter spear to continue onward. She had a feeling that the eternal heavenly god's defenses were extremely powerful, but if his defenses were breached, he would definitely become extremely fragile. When eternity was no longer eternal, then destruction would only take an instant. The eternal heavenly god unleashed all of his power, and the eternal slaughter spear tremored violently as he tried to pull it out. Freeze! I'm going to freeze you in place. Ao Xiaowu also unleashed all of her power as she gripped tightly onto the eternal slaughter spear. Stab! I'm going to impale you. Two completely different powers clashed with the crimson spiral spear, and the terrifying energy fluctuations caused the surrounding space to twist and warp. The eternal slaughter spear tremored incessantly, but it was unable to advance or retreat. Thus, both sides fell into a peculiar stalemate. Elsewhere on the battlefield, heavenly god Black Mist, used his turtle shell to crush Erlingshin to the brink of death before crashing directly toward the celestial arch. The heavenly space god had already fallen, and they had lost a powerful ally, so they definitely couldn't let this celestial arch live. If they couldn't trade him for two, then they had to trade him for one. However, she had still underestimated Chang'e's power. Everything beneath the moon was the land of the moon gods. Chang'e once more used teleportation, instantly appearing next to the celestial emperor and shielding him behind her. At the same time, she struck out with a great Heaven annihilation palm, slamming it against the turtle-shelled Empyrean god Black Mist. Golden energy and dark blue energy erupted at the same time before clashing violently with one another. This was the first time that Chang'e was facing off against a heavenly god who wasn't in a weakened state, and she felt as if all of the bones in her body were about to shatter. She planted her feet firmly on the ground as she channeled her power into the earth with all her might. The ground was first frozen by her power of the moon until it was covered in white snow, and then it was crushed by the black mist god's tortoise strike. This was only caused by the power of the black mist god's attack, so it could be imagined just how terrifying the power that Chang'e was facing was. The bright moon in the sky continuously cast its moonlight onto Chang'e's body, allowing her to continuously replenish her energy as she fought against the heavenly god. In the end, Chang'e withstood the terrifying power and blocked the heavenly god Black Mist in front of the celestial arch. "Sigh, you still failed?" A pretty young girl poked her head out of the turtle shell, and disappointment appeared in her expressionless, dead fish eyes. "In the end, my forte isn't attacking." Chang'e instantly felt terrible upon hearing this. She had used almost all of her strength to block this turtle shell attack, but the other party was telling her that attacking wasn't her forte? Then what was this heavenly god's forte? Chapter 2090. As long as I'm here, don't even think about hurting the celestial arch. Chang'e knew that heavenly god Black Mist was very strong, but she still stood firmly in front of the sky arch and spoke in a cold voice. The celestial emperor listened to these words and looked at the incomparably graceful figure in front of him, and for some reason he felt a little emotional. He didn't expect that he, a dignified heavenly emperor, would actually have a time when he was protected. Moreover, he was being protected by a woman. The celestial arch was a little disgruntled with this in mind, and he could only bring out another divine pill from his storage ring before stuffing it into his mouth. Rumble! The majestic medicinal power exploded in his body, quickly recovering his injuries and the strength in his body. This divine pill tastes quite good. The celestial arch nodded with satisfaction. For normal Tao integration stage super mighty figures, they probably wouldn't even be able to find a single divine pill in their storage ring. However, to the celestial arch, it was only a consumable that was of a slightly higher caliber. The celestial arch was the founder of the celestial court and had ruled over the kingdom of the 9 states for such a long time. His cultivation base might not be able to progress any further, but his wealth could definitely keep up. The celestial arch felt like, in terms of wealth, he was comparable to some gods of creation. Aside from that nouveau riche Shinlin, there was definitely no one in the entire kingdom of the 9 states who was richer than him. The medicinal power of the divine pill was very strong. The celestial Thearka's depleted energy began to be rapidly replenished. When Empyrean god Black Mist saw this, his expression grew even more solemn. One Chang'e was already very difficult to deal with. If there was another celestial arch, then she would also face great danger. Now he could either retreat or find a way to break through the situation of his teammates. She wanted to see which heavenly god could finish off the enemy as soon as possible and then join her battle. Only then would she be able to kill the heavenly emperor in one fell swoop before he could recover from his injuries. Sigh. We came in high spirits, thinking that our enemies were just clay chickens and pottery dogs that we could easily destroy. Only after we truly began to fight did we discover that our enemies aren't like what we imagined them to be. Up until now, all of our people have died. Instead, we are the ones in trouble. Empyrean god Black Mist shook his head and sighed, his gaze moving between the two remaining Empyrean gods. The heavenly karma god was still being battered by the black and white spirit snakes, and no one knew how long it was going to last. On the other hand, the eternal heavenly god seemed to have reached a decisive moment. The eternal slaying spear slowly pierced into the eternal heavenly god's chest. The eternal heavenly god had been desperately trying to free himself from Ao Xiao's control with the eternal spear. However, he then diverted a portion of his power to his 18 arms, materializing eternal swords of 18 different elements that stabbed toward different parts of Ao Xiao's body at the same time. It knew that instead of fighting Ao Xiao for the eternal slaying spear, it would be better to use a lethal attack to force Ao Xiao back. At such a close distance, there was no way Ao Xiao could control the spear while dodging its attacks, because he had diverted some of his energy to attack Ao Xiao. Ao Xiao took advantage of this opportunity to stab the eternal heavenly god even deeper with the eternal killing spear, causing the eternal heavenly god to tremble in pain. However, the eternal Empyrean god did not panic, because everything would be worth it. As long as Ao Xiao retreated, it wouldn't. Chi. The sharp blade pierced into his flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Countless flowers of blood appeared in the eternal heavenly god's vision. The eternal heavenly god was dumbfounded. In the face of 18 terrifying eternal swords, Ao Xiao did not choose to retreat. She merely tilted her head to the side to evade a lethal strike aimed at her head. However, her other arms, neck, chest, abdomen, and legs were all punctured by countless blades. Blood instantly stained her crimson robe, making it appear as if she were a blossoming red flower. This woman, did she have a death wish? Just as the eternal heavenly god was thinking this, the spiral-slaying spear stabbed into his chest again. The sound of his body being torn apart was accompanied by an indescribably excruciating pain, and the eternal heavenly god was suddenly struck by the urge to howl in pain. Ao Xiao had taken advantage of the eternal heavenly god's distraction to unleash another ferocious attack. The eternal heavenly god understood now. It wasn't that Ao Xiao didn't want to live. She wanted to kill him. Only by going all out would she be able to seize this final opportunity to defeat the eternal heavenly god. Ao Xiao had always been aware of this fact. She knew that if she was forced to let go this time, then the eternal heavenly god definitely wouldn't give her another chance to do so in the following battles. This was her last chance, so no matter what, she had to hold onto the eternal killing spear. No matter how severe her injuries were, she wouldn't let go. The eternal heavenly god was in a panic. He had underestimated Ao Xiao's determination. The eternal slaying spear slowly pierced into the stone statue's chest. Ao Xiao's entire body was trembling uncontrollably. The eternal sword was still embedded within her body, as if it were a divine weapon that would never dissipate. It was unleashing its power in a frenzy, destroying her body and causing her power to plummet. Her intricate features were scrunched up, and she was clearly still in a deep slumber, but she was in extreme pain, as if she were having a nightmare and could wake up at any moment. A lot of hope was ignited in the eternal heavenly god's heart upon seeing this. Hold on. This dragon tribe woman wasn't going to be able to hold on for much longer. As long as she woke up, or as long as she lost all of her blood, then victory would be his. The eternal heavenly god actually wanted to stab Ao Xiao a few more times, but he really didn't dare to disperse his power. He was afraid that Ao Xiao would stab him to death with the eternal slaying spear before he could do so. This was a soundless battle, unlike the earth-shattering battles of the other heavenly gods. This battle was exceptionally quiet at this point in time. It was as if the two of them were in a standoff. The only thing that changed was the killing spear in eternal heavenly god's body, which was slowly moving. Even though this battle was soundless, it was far more dangerous and exciting than a normal battle. The eternal heavenly God didn't know if the sleeping Ao Xiao was nervous or not. However, he was extremely nervous. Ao Xiao's entire body was drenched in blood, and both her vitality and power were constantly slipping away. Her attacks had also become sluggish, and it wouldn't be long before she didn't even have the power to continue stabbing with the eternal heavenly God. The eternal heavenly God felt like he could win, but he needed to add a few more tricks to establish the foundation for victory. How could a sleeping person wake up? One was pain, and the other was noise. If pain couldn't wake her up, then why not make some noise? It just so happened that the eternal heavenly God didn't need to expend much of his power to make a noise, so he could use the least amount of power to inflict the most damage. This was definitely a perfect experiment. Thus the eternal heavenly God spoke. ZZZT, ZZZT, ah boom 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 rip. An earth-shattering boom erupted. Like the sound of fingernails scraping against a blackboard, the most terrifying sound in the world erupted. Sure enough, Ao Xiao's brows were tightly furrowed, and a pained expression appeared on her face as her entire body trembled uncontrollably, as if she had fallen into a nightmare. It was working, and it was working extraordinarily well. The eternal heavenly God was ecstatic. Ah, yeah. Ao Xiao let loose a wail of anguish, and her eyes abruptly opened. There seemed to be boundless rage, indignation, and frustration in her eyes as boundless power surged from her body, and she stabbed the eternal slaughter spear in her hand forward with all her might. Boom! The crimson spear punctured the eternal heavenly God's body, leaving a lethal trajectory that stretched for close to 500 kilometers in the air. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The eternal heavenly God was still whistling noisily. Crunch, crunch. The eternal heavenly God moved for the first time, and his head drooped as he stared blankly at the punctured body. Chapter 2091. Ao Xiao's eyes, which were filled with boundless rage and indignation, gradually regained clarity. However, her face was still filled with displeasure. She glared at the statue in front of her and said calmly, "Disturbing someone's sleep. Who doesn't get angry when they wake up?" Morning temper? The eternal, heavenly God suddenly seemed to have understood something. It looked at the furious and aggrieved woman before it with an exasperated expression. Could it be that you borrowed the power of your morning temper to unleash that power? Ao Xiao nodded. That's right. I have a hidden skill, which is that when my hack mode is forcibly disrupted or I'm woken up from my slumber, I'll be able to unleash all of the accumulated power within my body due to my negative emotions. This is known as the power of waking up. Eternal heavenly God, what the hell? Power of morning temper? Was there really such a thing? The eternal heavenly God had the urge to throw up blood. In the previous battle, any change in power would affect the outcome of the battle, which meant that his sudden inspiration had accidentally unleashed the last of Ao Xiao's power, thereby becoming the final straw that broke his back. The eternal heavenly God's body trembled as if he had just swallowed a pile of *T. What the hell had he just done? This was no longer just drawing legs on a snake. This was AF*King self-detonation. Huh, you're crying? Ao Xiao turned to the eternal heavenly God with a surprised expression. The eternally motionless statue actually had 2 streams of turbulent liquid flowing down from its eyes. It looked like it was about to converge into a river. No, this is just flowing water. The eternal heavenly God refused. Ao Xiao. Crack, 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 the flawless divine halo above the eternal celestial God's head, which looked as if it would never change even after the passage of countless years, suddenly began to crack uncontrollably. It wasn't like the divine halo from before, which only had a single crack, after which the crack stopped growing. It was like a falling domino. Pulling one hair would affect the whole body. Starting from the smallest, it would increase in number and number until it was directly heading towards destruction. No, I can't die like this. The eternal heavenly God's body trembled with emotion. However, his efforts could not prevent this from happening. The eternal Empyrean God was indeed invincible to a certain extent, but once his eternal state was broken, when eternity was no longer eternal, only death awaited him. The eternal heavenly God roared as he pounced toward Ao Xiao, trying to kill the severely wounded Ao Xiao as well. However, in the process of its attack, its body was rapidly disintegrating at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then it turned into particles of light and dissipated. By the time it reached Ao Xiao, its body had already disappeared. It had completely transformed into a gust of fierce wind and disappeared from heaven and earth. The wind swept Ao Xiao's disheveled hair, which was stained with blood. She just stood there quietly, her blood-stained clothes fluttering in the wind. "I've finally won." A vibrant smile appeared on Ao Xiao's face, but there was a hint of poignant beauty in her vibrant smile. "Everyone says that the dragon court of the eastern seas is a disgrace to the primordial dragon tribe. Now that I've killed a heavenly god, who can say that my Ao dragon tribe is weak?" The surrounding cultivators were already cheering excitedly. All sorts of gazes of reverence and fanaticism were directed at the delicate woman in red. Being able to kill a near-invincible heavenly god was enough to stun the entire Eastern Front. A smile appeared on Ao Xiao's face as she tried to continue battling. However, she was struck by an unbearable sense of dizziness, and her body swayed slightly before her vision fell into darkness. "How dare you kill the eternal heavenly God? I'll send you to your death right now." A heaven pioneer stage great general let loose an enraged roar as he tore through the air atop his flaming celestial sword and flew toward the unconscious woman in red. At this moment, another peerlessly powerful saber projection fell from the sky before striking the great general in an extremely brutal manner. The great general raised his sword to defend himself, but the terrifying saber projection instantly shattered his flaming celestial sword before slamming him into the ground along with his sword. A true god with monstrous battle intent appeared before Ao Xiao. "You'll have to ask for my permission first if you want to kill her." A man with 3 of his eyes open spoke in a cold voice. Even though he was severely wounded, he was still standing proudly. That's right, he was true Lord Erling of the Celestial Court. Erlingshin had thought things through. If he couldn't mess with a heavenly god, then he would go and take care of the heaven pioneer stage great generals on the battlefield. He was going to give these arrogant, great generals a taste of the wrath of the war god of the Celestial Court. Heavenly Goddess Black Mist was completely terrified upon witnessing everything that was unfolding. At this moment, Chang'e's attacks rained down upon her in rapid succession. Bursts of pure power of the moon exploded between heaven and earth, creating an extremely dazzling sight to behold. Heavenly Goddess Black Mist retreated over and over again as she endured Chang'e's attacks. It wasn't that she was afraid of Chang'e. To put it more accurately, she was afraid of this battlefield. Heavenly God Donglong had died of exhaustion. The heavenly space god had been slammed to death by the moon. The eternal heavenly god was courting death, and the heavenly karma god was being pummeled over and over again. It looked like it would be difficult for them to turn the tables. In the worst-case scenario, they might even be pummeled to death one after another. Only she had a slight advantage. However, if the Celestial Darch managed to recover his full strength, how was she supposed to fight this battle? Did she have to rely on a divine, heaven-stage, heavenly human like her to turn the tables? If she activated her 9 divine halos and unleashed her maximum power, there was a chance that she could defeat Chang'e and the Celestial Darch. However, there was a very important problem, and that was she didn't want to die. All divine heaven-stage, heavenly humans with 9 divine halos were definitely going to die. In reality, most heavenly gods would choose to activate their 9 divine halos without hesitation, even if they were going to perish. They were willing to sacrifice themselves for the sake of the heavenly Tao and for the sake of victory. However, Empyrean god Black Mist was different. She was still protecting him very well. I can't die yet. I can't die now. Heavenly goddess Black Mist's dead fish eyes were filled with determination. My power of darkness belongs to the heavenly darkness god. I haven't even seen him, so how can I die here? Besides, even if I activate my 9 divine halos, there's a very high chance that I will still lose this battle. The young woman heaved a forlorn sigh as she made some calculations in her mind. In the end, she seemed to have made some sort of decision as her crisp voice erupted throughout the entire battlefield. All Heavenly Human Tribe United Army, heed my command. Cease your attacks and retreat. Heavenly Goddess Black Mist's voice spread throughout the entire battlefield. The Heavenly Karma God stared at the young woman with incredulity. He then turned to look at the ferocious black spirit snake and white spirit snake, then at the astonishingly powerful Chong, E and the Celestial Arch, who was recovering in secret before gritting his teeth and issuing a command. Retreat! Everyone retreat! The command of the 2 heavenly gods shook the entire battlefield. The kingdom of the 9 States United Army was trembling with tears of excitement. They had won this Eastern Front defensive battle. Chapter 2092. The Heavenly Human Tribe United Army of over 70 million immediately began to retreat upon receiving the Heavenly God's command. However, the remaining 30 million soldiers of the Kingdom of the 9 States United Army chased after them. They knew that the retreat of their enemies was the best opportunity to retaliate. This was also the best opportunity to capitalize on their victory. Heavenly God Black Mist and Heavenly God Karma protected the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army as they retreated. The Celestial Arch, who had recovered a portion of his strength, also joined the fray. He chased after the fleeing Heavenly Human Tribe United Army with devastating might, killing one powerful being after another. The eastern front of the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army was rapidly dwindling. On the central front of the Tai Chu continent, outside Yutong City, the previously ferocious undead army suddenly began to fall to the ground, turning into ashes that were even smaller than dust. The 5th heaven and earth destruction melody, reincarnation, was gone. It hadn't been broken by the enemy. Instead, it had lost its effectiveness. This technique was simply far too powerful. If it continued to be used, the heaven-crushing United Army would suffer a terrifying backlash. As such, they were already at their limit. Even though the 5th melody had ended abruptly, the heaven-crushing United Army was ecstatic, and the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army was astonished. The Heavenly Human Tribe United Army's army of 180 million had been reduced to around 110 million. But what about the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army? They had only lost over 6 million soldiers, but they still had around 70 million soldiers. The Heaven-Crushing Alliance's losses had reached a shocking 1-to-10 ratio, and this was even in a situation where they were outnumbered. How could they not be stunned? The 2 sides began to draw closer and closer in numbers. The Heavenly Human Tribe United Army was quickly losing their advantage in numbers. However, the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army continued to fight with all their might in the face of such a crushing defeat. The heaven-crushing United Army's confidence was greatly boosted, and they fought with all their might. The battlefield had once again become a grindstone of life and death. In the western front of Yutong City, there were 2 bursts of energy that seemed to be threatening to tear the heavens apart, clashing with one another. One of the bursts of energy was boundless, greenish-yellow, and it was resonating with the entire boundless continent. The other burst of energy was dark and tranquil, and it seemed to be drawing half of heaven and earth into an eternal void, as if it were going to engulf everything in this world. A battle of this level would make ordinary experts feel uneasy just by looking at it. Even Tao integration stage, super mighty figures felt their flesh crawl as they looked at the battlefield from afar. This was no longer a battlefield that they could step foot in. At the center of the battle, Anlin's white robe was dyed in darkness, as if he was the ruler of darkness. Boundless darkness surged behind him. He wielded his evil-slaying sword, which was also as black as ink, and slashed it toward the heavenly earth god. The boundless darkness behind him continued to engulf the heavenly earth god, but it was unable to break through the boundless greenish-yellow power. The heavenly earth god's fist was blocking the evil-slaying sword strike. The ground beneath his feet was his backing, and it was precisely because of this that his stature was so imposing that no one could compare to him. With a single glance, one would unconsciously feel their own insignificance. However, Enlil did not feel that way. Right now, he felt that he was a patch of darkness and nothingness. Whether the other party was strong or noble had nothing to do with him. If he was unhappy, he could just use the darkness to devour him. You can't hold on much longer, right? Enlil suddenly smiled as he looked at the youth standing before him. The heavenly earth god's expression became extremely dark. You're just an undeveloped darkness, and you dare to challenge me? The youth was filled with indignation and humiliation. He stared at Enlil, only to discover that Enlil seemed to have fused into the darkness, and no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to see Enlil's true appearance. No, that wasn't it. The heavenly earth god's heart jolted slightly with shock. Enlil was the darkness, and what he was seeing was Enlil's true body. His true body was the darkness. All I see is darkness. Hee, are you going to abandon your human body in order to defeat me? The heavenly earth god chuckled coldly. We're one body, so why would I abandon it? Enlil spoke in an indifferent voice. The evil-slaying sword slowly descended, and inky black cracks began to appear on the heavenly earth god's fist. The darkness began to seep into his body. The heavenly earth god was both shocked and enraged. His invincible defense had been broken by Enlil just like that? No, he refused to accept this. He gritted his teeth and unleashed all of his power to defend himself against the onslaught of darkness. However, the darkness was like ink that had fallen into a lake, and it continued to spread in the end. Even the clearest lake water would be stained inky black by this black ink. The heavenly earth god's power was extremely terrifying, and it could even be said that he was invincible. However, matter was boundless, and under the suppression of the heavenly Tao, the amount of matter that he could control was limited. In the face of the relentless onslaught of Enlil's boundless darkness, he was still forced to reveal an opening. The bluish-yellow energy that had taken up half of heaven and earth was quickly being corroded by the darkness. The darkness was like an omnipresent demonic claw, slowly tearing through the power of the earth and pulverizing it. I've won. Enlil's expression was cold and devoid of any joy, as if he were pronouncing his enemy's death sentence. The evil-slaying sword in his hand slowly descended. The fist was torn apart by the black light before being engulfed. Immediately afterward, the evil-slaying sword crashed down. Whoosh! The domineering, profound, and gloomy sword intent sliced through everything before it, extending into infinity and beyond, slicing the paramount power of the heavenly gods, the sky, the earth, and the boundless void in half, extending for thousands of kilometers. The youth in the armor of the heavenly earth god still wore an expression of indignation and incredulity on his face. His armor had been sliced in half, and a black sword gash extended from his head all the way to his feet. How could this be? I lost. The heavenly earth god stumbled back a few steps. He looked on as the inky black sword gash continued to expand on his body, but he was unable to do anything about it. In the end, he was completely engulfed by the darkness right before Enlil's cold eyes. The darkness dissipated and the earth disappeared. There was only a white-robed figure standing on the ground with a sword in his hand. The heavenly yin-yang god stared at the scenes unfolding before his eyes in astonishment, as if he had seen something extremely terrifying. Am I seeing things? The heavenly earth god has been slain. How could Enlil be so powerful? The world is about to change. Heavenly Sea God, what do we do? How could you? Slap. The heavenly sea god slapped the heavenly yin-yang god on the head, almost giving him a concussion. Calm down. The heavenly earth god is a paramount heavenly god with unrivaled combat prowess. Are you looking down on him by saying that he was slain by Enlil? The heavenly sea god roared with rage. The heavenly yin-yang god was on the verge of tears. He didn't want to say something like this, but the truth was right before his eyes. Why did he have to be slapped even though he was telling the truth? It was also at this moment that the boundless earth suddenly began to tremor. Heaven and earth changed color again. Boundless green and yellow energy rose up from the cracked earth and into the clouds. "It's here!" The heavenly sea god spoke in a solemn voice. "It's here? What's here?" The heavenly yin-yang god was dumbstruck. When paramount heavenly gods are forced into a corner, they only have one chance to completely break free from their shackles and unleash their ultimate power, the heavenly sea god explained. The heavenly yin-yang god was completely dumbstruck. He had never heard of something like this, which means the heavenly earth god isn't dead. The heavenly yin-yang god asked with excitement, "Of course." The heavenly sea god unleashed a shield around himself and the heavenly yin-yang god. "It's about to appear. The heavenly earth god's true form of Tao,